Hello and welcome to the Con Couple. I'm Richard.
I think your name is actually The Accent's Real.
Do you want to tell everybody who you are now that you've ruined my perfectly fine intro?
I'm Caroline, and my badge actually says that. I changed his badge because at this con you can put whatever name you want on your badges to The Accent's Real. People called him that all weekend. It was great.
Yep. Next time I need to actually check what name you're putting on the badges when you buy the tickets.
That will require you to plan and look in advance like I do.
Oh yeah, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But we go to far too many cons every year.
I would say we go to too few, but you know.
Yeah. And this week we were up in theoretically Detroit, Michigan, but in reality Ann Arbour.
Anyone who lives in that area of Michigan knows that Detroit, Ann Arbor, and the surrounding cities are all kind of one giant metropolis at this point. So I'm sure I probably offended somebody by saying that, but we're in that area of the world.
Yeah. For Motor City Furry Con.
It's just called FurCon.
Really?
Yes.
All of their contact information says Furry.
Maybe it is Furry. I'll look it up. Well, I need to look up the schedule anyway.
Yep.
As you can tell, this is a high quality and well researched podcast.
Yep. So, should we get the usual disclaimers out the way first? You may or may not be able to tell, we are recording this podcast in our car on the drive home.
Which is how we normally record, and we put the disclaimer in front of every podcast episode because we have already noticed that people only kind of tend to watch the episodes about cons they were at, which is a valid life choice.
That's a very sensible way to listen to a podcast like this.
But it does mean we have to remind you that even though we're on the road, Richard is driving. Sorry, the accent real is driving.
Oh, that's going to be fun.
And he is using a lapel mic. Both his hands are on the steering wheel at all times. Any type of technical stuff, I'm running as the person in the passenger seat. And if anything becomes unsafe or uneasy, we will stop recording and not start recording again until we're past whatever that more difficult bit of driving is.
Yeah, which we're hoping doesn't happen, largely because I don't want to have to bother editing anything. Yeah. We're too lazy to do that. So.
Yeah, you're right. It's Murder City Furry Con, by the way.
That's what I thought. So, furry conventions. This is our third time going to a furry convention.
Yeah, I don't know how many furry conventions you have to go to become a furry. We did find a new name for ourselves this weekend.
Yes, we did. So we found out that apparently people who go to a lot of conventions but don't necessarily, they go to conventions because they enjoy conventions rather than because they're a fan of the specific thing the convention is of, are apparently called convention surfers. I am way too uncool to be called a surfer.
That's true. I'm moderately cooler.
Yeah, this is fair. So, this particular convention was held at, do you happen to know the name of the hotel?
Eagle Crest, I think is the name of the hotel, in Yipsy whatever. I'm not going to get the S right or the weird Y one right, but it's great.
Yeah. Which is a sort of mid-sized hotel. We've definitely been to conventions at smaller ones and conventions at bigger ones. And I would say was probably somewhere in the 1,500 to 2,000 range in terms of number of people there. So certainly not the biggest furry con in the world. We've actually been to that.
Yeah, AnthroCon, I think, is one of the biggest. I think they're still probably debating who the biggest is. I'm going to try to find the schedule because the one online is only showing Sunday, so give me a minute. Why don't you talk a little bit about what it means to be a furry while I do that?
Okay. So, for anybody not aware, people who are furries enjoy dressing up in elaborate costumes known as fursuits. These are...
That's not all furries, you're already messing it up.
I know, I'm already wrong. Fursuits are traditionally animal-themed, but frequently have combinations of different animals or all kinds of interesting artistic stuff behind them. The people who do that are known as fursuiters, and they are not the entire furry community, but they are an important part of the furry community. Would you say that is a fair statement?
Yes.
Yes.
Generally, I'm told that the broadest definition of furry is just anyone who likes anthropomorphic animals, anthropomorphic being two-legged as opposed to four-legged type of thing. But there's also a lot of crossover of just liking animals generally, and that doesn't necessarily mean they like animals in a, I'm just going to say, suggestive way, since we're not a plus 18 podcast.
Yeah.
Which some do, but some don't. Both of those ideologies are valid. And not all people who are into anthropomorphic animals fursuit, not all of them are interested in more suggestive relations. And a lot of them are just people who happen to like animals and dressing up, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And again, this is much like the steampunk con we were at a couple of weeks ago. Furry cons really like to celebrate creativity.
Mm-hmm.
They, if you, so whereas at a steampunk con you're liable to have your persona, which is going to be this character you've built up, you've like acquired bits and pieces over time. Furry con's working on exactly the same basic principle. It's called a fursona rather than a persona. But other than that, as a general rule of thumb, you are expected to have your idea, your character, and a lot of furries consider that persona to be an important part of themselves. For some of them, they describe it almost as their true self, but I get the impression that people who describe it as their true self are the minority. For most of them, it's just, this is a piece of themselves that they can express in this way, and that's a wonderful, beautiful thing to see.
And like everyone, I think, feels that to some extent. They just feel it with this animal that they've kind of created that's kind of an amalgamation of who they think that they are. Whereas other people feel it with other stuff. Like I feel it when I'm wearing a ball gown. You feel it when you're British.
I love the fact that, like, the annoying thing is she's right.
I know. Isn't it great?
Yeah.
It's a core part of your identity.
It is. I somehow made being British a personality trait back when I was still living in the UK.
And he doesn't even like tea.
Always with the tea thing. Anywho.
So I do want to emphasize we're, I guess a term that I've also heard is furry adjacent. We go to fur cons, but we're not otherwise involved in the furry community, in part because furry social media terrifies the heck out of me. Not because it's necessarily bad, just because it's very niche in terms of trying to figure out how to use it.
Yeah.
So we not necessarily be the best people to explain all of the furry community other than to say it is inclusive and it's not necessarily suggestive. There are plenty of ways to enjoy a furry con that aren't suggestive. And even though this con was a plus 18 con, you could easily go to it and pretty much never feel uncomfortable regardless of what your comfort level is with adult stuff.
Yeah. Provided you don't mind the odd bit of innuendo.
Yeah. I mean, innuendo's at every con anyway.
It is. So yeah. What I will say is that if you are somebody who's never attended a furry con and is trying to figure out if they would like to, we are probably the people who can answer that question.
Yeah, and we're happy to talk about it. Hopefully this episode will give you some idea about whether or not it's a thing that you want to try to do. But I will say the furry community, we'll probably talk about this a lot, very welcoming, very supportive, and they love when new people join them, which is awesome.
So,
there was a bomb threat also at the past two cons. I probably shouldn't have segued into that.
Yeah, there were subtle ways to do that, honey.
Yeah, whatever.
But yes, the last couple of years, this con has had issues because somebody issued a bomb threat at them 2 years ago, did it again last year.
Which, to be clear, is not on the con. This could happen to any con, and from what I can tell, they followed protocol with it. And there was no bomb or safety risk. And great news is, this year,
no bomb threat.
No mandatory outside time.
Yep.
Which likely means that their heightened security measures have worked, and it also means that they were able to communicate with the hotel and city to have those heightened security measures there.
Yeah. Yeah, we did see a cop at one point on like midday Saturday, I think. But to me, it was basically a police officer kind of checking in with the security team, making sure that everything was fine. And I saw him once. I didn't see him again. I don't think there was any significant problem worth noting.
It's not really relevant to our review of the con, but it is something if you Google Murder City Furry Con that you're going to find pretty immediately because there's news stories about it. So kind of want to mention it.
Motor City Furry Con, honey.
What did I just call it?
Murder City Furry Con.
Oh, oops. That was a great Freudian slip there.
Yeah,
there was no murder. If you want to change your name to that, I respect it, but there was no murder.
There was, in fact, no murder at this con. Either that or they did a very competent job covering it up.
Yes.
So, this podcast is going great. So, you may be able to tell we're a little punch drunk after this weekend, which is something I definitely felt a lot last night. And for the record, I said punch drunk, not actual drunk. I'm completely sober and legal to drive.
I can't have alcohol because it breaks my body and kills me way faster than it kills normal people.
Yep, and I only drink socially, and if you're not drinking, it's not fun for me generally. So I very rarely bother these days.
But punch drunk is kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling that we term it when you get at cons. I also sometimes call it con high, but it's a particular type of con high where you're just you're having a really good time. You're in your comfort zone. You feel really nice. Things have gotten a bit silly. You're also a bit sleep deprived, and it just kind of amalgamates into this kind of
fairly enjoyable, like you are going to laugh at things that aren't that funny kind of feeling.
yeah. It's great.
Yeah,
For the reason we like cons.
yeah, it's wonderful. It doesn't happen to us at that many cons, but when it does, it's a really nice feeling. So
Those are the basics.
Yeah.
That's what a furry is. That's what bomb threats are.
yeah,
There was no murder. Let's maybe get into the actual con.
yeah, we should probably do that. Given that. So we mentioned the fact that we do this podcast to the people who run the con, or at one of their panels, which again we'll talk about a little bit later. And they asked me to send it to them. I am so sorry you're listening to this right now.
Yeah, I respect whoever from this con is listening to this. You guys were great. I want to emphasize again there was no murder. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in detail. And as a reminder, when we review cons, we do sometimes come up with criticisms or critiques. But those criticisms or critiques are always done A, with love, B, with the recognition that this, like most cons we attend, although not the one last weekend, are all done by volunteers. So this is an entirely volunteer-based organization.
Yep.
And with furry cons in particular, they're a volunteer organization that helps particular charities pretty significantly through the donations throughout the weekend.
Yep.
And generally it's an animal-based charity.
Yep.
In this case, I think it was a wolf-based charity.
Yep.
I will.
Creek, something or other.
I'll look it up in the schedule while you
if
keep
you
explaining.
wouldn't mind doing that. So yeah. So let's talk about the hotel specifically to start with, because that's usually what we start with. So as we mentioned, the venue for this was a mid-sized hotel. I think is probably the best way to describe it. That does a bunch of this kind of stuff. We were actually there for UConn, a board gaming convention a few months back. So we already had a basic idea of the layout and the space. And it's always interesting to see how different events use it. So for a board gaming con, the main events room, or the main ballroom, was kind of divided into lots of tables, so you could use it for that. Here they used the main ballroom, set up a big stage, and used that as their main panel room. They had a sort of lecture theatre style room as their
Secondary events.
And then they had 3 panel rooms upstairs, I believe.
There are 4, I think, upstairs. 2 artist alleys, 1 safe for work artist alley, 1 not safe for work artist alley.
Which I appreciate the fact they separated those 2 things out.
Yeah, a lot of cons don't. It's nice that this con does.
Yeah. They also had an Artemis Bridge simulator. Shout out to the Artemis Bridge simulator.
At Concoction.
Concoction.
We assume this is not run by the same person, but maybe there's a
know.
community of people who run them. We don't really know.
Yeah.
That was kind of the basic layout of the space. And I think in terms of attendance,
I would guess somewhere in the 1,500 to 2,000 range.
That sounds about right. Badge numbers are, we think, ordered, probably starting at like number 0001.
Yep.
And the highest number I think we saw all weekend was like in the 1,600s. So I think that's a pretty fair range, I guess.
Yeah, but that was on the Sunday, and so this is an interesting thing. Whereas with a lot of cons, the big day is Saturday. Furry cons are just busy the whole weekend.
Yep.
Like I don't know what specifically it is about furry cons, but I think it's just a case of if you're going to the trouble to go to a furry con, you're probably taking the Friday off work and going for the whole weekend. We are currently driving home at about 20 past. It's currently about 20 past 3 on the Sunday, and there is what is known as the Dead Dog Dance going on tonight until what, 9?
9. I do think it's partially so that people who are drunk or hungover get an extra night of sleep at furry cons, because it's pretty common for them to have a Sunday night dance.
Yep.
And most people leave on Monday morning, which means that they typically go Thursday to Monday. So they're a bit longer than most other cons if you really want to do the whole thing, although not everyone does.
Not everybody does, but I think it's a higher percentage of people do that. So I will be curious to know what their attendance numbers are. Some cons publish that, some cons don't, but we will see. And so yeah, the hotel itself, perfectly functional con hotel. We've been to a couple of cons there. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely not the best convention space we've been to, but for the most part, it works pretty well. How do we think they're doing in terms of utilizing the con space?
mean, it is something for which I do want to emphasize that if you are running a convention, particularly a convention that's above a certain size, like maybe 500 people or more, which is most conventions, no hotel space is going to be perfect. It's just going to be impossible to find the thing that meets the exact thing you need for your con. Like, you have to kind of compromise somewhere. And I think there were some compromises they were making.
I think so.
Like they called their dealer's room the dealer's den. It's kind of an ode to like wolf dens, which is cute. And their dealer's den was kind of in a tent behind it was like in a weird greenhouse area.
So it was in a building, but it was in a building that wasn't connected to the main hotel. But they put up a sort of polytunnel kind of thing to connect the two things so that you didn't get rained on too much. Which again, I think was a compromise, but I think it was one that mostly worked, or at least worked for us, given that we don't really care that much about the dealer's den.
Yeah, it works, I think, a bit for us. It is something that I think it's a bit difficult. Furry cons in general, I do not know why I can't talk right now, tend to have more problems with space than most other cons because most people there, at least a decent chunk of people, are going to be wearing fursuits, which take up a lot of room, or partial fursuits, or have tails.
Yep.
And that means that maneuverability in space is a lot more limited.
Yep.
And they do tend to be very, very good about accommodating each other. Everyone's super respectful.
Yep.
I was in a ball gown all weekend. People were super respectful of me. It was great.
Yep.
But it does mean you're going to run into space issues more quicker. And I don't know how you would have navigated that dealer's den if you were in a fursuit. It would have been quite difficult.
Possible, but definitely tricky.
Like, I was having trouble in a ball gown.
Yeah.
It also wasn't open terribly long. Like, it was open from 11 to 6, I think, according to the schedule most days, which is not a lot of time for shopping, because those are peak con hours. There wasn't really a time you could go if you wanted the space to be a little bit quieter. Yeah. From 11 to 6, it's just going to be, as the Brits would say, chocker every single day.
She actually used that correctly, which I'm quite impressed by. But yeah, the other thing, if you're contemplating going to a FurCon, the thing you need to keep in mind is fursuiters can't see anything.
Yes.
Their range of vision, the heads on a full fursuit, yeah, that is very restricting of their vision. They have absolutely zero peripheral vision. Don't try and sneak around them. Make sure they're aware you're there. Otherwise, they're going to bump into you, and you don't want to damage their suits. Those things cost a lot of money. Wait, I did. How much did they say the current record is?
I think it was like $70K or something like
Somewhere
that.
in that ballpark.
I mean, that was for a very particular one, and I will admit I don't wear fursuits or know much about how they're constructed, so I can't explain it all to you. The point is, as they pointed out, they're pieces of art. They should be respected, and you should be careful around fursuiters generally.
But yeah. But no, as I say, for the most part, I think they were making good use of the space at the con center. Mm. And I do, for the most part, I actually like this hotel as a con center.
I do too. It is something for which it does have limited amount of space in some circumstances. So you're probably, I think, 2,000 is probably the upper limit on what you could do, depending on the exact people who are there and how many.
I would say so. Again, maybe you could push to about 2,200, but I think much past that you'd be pushing your luck. But again, at the moment, it's the right place for them. If they grow by much more, they might start running into more issues.
And unfortunately, one of the realities with furry cons also is I do think that might be a little bit more limited in terms of hotel space, because people who don't understand furries or have heard the horror stories about furry cons might be less willing to host them.
Yep.
Which I want to emphasize is not most furry cons. You can attend a furry con, be totally safe. And the weird stuff that happens really isn't that much more weird than what happens at a normal con after hours.
It's really not. Pretty much any con you go to is going to have a story that involves, yeah, this guest got drunk, and did something stupid. But here's the thing. Furries cons, you tend to hear about it a bit more, purely because, again, they have a reputation because people think they're weird. And that's pretty unjustified, I would say.
Mm-hmm. There's going to be bad actors in any community.
Yeah.
But the majority of furries are incredibly nice, decent people, and they're also really accepting of people who have varying levels of comfort with the furry community. Neither of us have probably ever fursuit or anything like that, but they've welcomed us with open arms, even though our interest in anthropomorphic animals is limited. I do like animals, but don't really care about them being anthropomorphized or want art. So They still like us. They just want to hang out with us, and they're pretty cool. Just as long as we're not judgmental of them, they're not going to be judgmental of us.
Like while I was waiting in that line at the end of the day, I was talking to somebody who recognized us from Anthrocon last year, and just we had a quick couple of minutes chat while we were waiting.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Very wholesome community.
Yep.
And as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, due to my disability, we typically don't stay on site at the hotel.
Yep.
Because my disability makes it difficult for me to stay in hotel rooms, so we typically get an Airbnb. This is not an Airbnb review podcast. Our Airbnb was fine.
Yep.
It's about 20 minutes away from the venue, but it was cheap and served our needs.
Yep, it was fine. It did the job. We didn't need it to do any more than that.
Which also means we can't really comment on late night parties because we don't do those.
Nope.
But presumably the people who did them had fun. And I will say, Furry social media does have like Telegram where you can like get on apps and find room parties and stuff like that. It's a bit intimidating when you first go in. If it's something you're interested in when you're at a con, I recommend it.
So that's kind of the hotel space. I also briefly want to talk about the availability of food, because that's always a useful thing. There was a lot of food available at this con.
Yeah. So as a reminder, with my disability, I also can't really eat like normal people, so I rely on him to do the food review.
So the hotel itself has a bar that serves food. They also had set up a station that was doing, burgers, hot dogs, the usual kind of, that stuff. Interestingly, almost exactly the same as the stuff at the Steampunk Con we were at a few weeks ago, but nearly double the price. Don't know if that's a difference between, I suspect that's just a hotel thing.
Well, you can't comment on the quality because you didn't try any of it.
I did not try any of it.
You're addicted to this like one burger place that's up there.
So, fun fact, when we were at Yukon, by pure happenstance, I stopped off at the Tasty's Burger, and it was really good.
This podcast is not sponsored by Tasty's Burger.
It is not. Tasty's, if you want to give me some money, I will absolutely take that. Or just, I will take free burgers. But yeah, so since we were up here, and, I basically said, I'm just going to check how convenient it is. It's only like 10 minutes out of our way on the drive back. I'm comfortable with that. Are you? You didn't tell me no?
I was going to tell you no. It's important for you to get food, and you need to eat during the day, unlike me, who can't.
Yeah. So basically, I just swung by a Tasty's Burger on the way back to the Airbnb both nights, which worked quite happily. I said both nights. We were here for 3 nights. But anyway.
I think you ate earlier anyway.
Anyway.
So you want to talk more about the con food? Because the con also offered food, I think.
Yes. So if you were of a certain tier, so we just got standard visitor badges. That's usually what we do.
And I think we paid around $70 for those. I'm going to double check on the website really quick.
That sounds reasonable. So we just had the standard attendee badges. But if you had the VIP or the sponsor level badges, I believe it was, they had a special sponsors lounge, which was a place where you could go, you could sit down. You could, after 6 p.m. at night, get some alcoholic beverages, and also had food available throughout the day, ranging from actual meals to snacks.
And sponsored badges were, and keep in mind they do change their pricing depending on when you get your ticket. The earlier you get your ticket, the lower your price is going to be. For, I think, weekend of, which is what it's showing right now, it would be $155 for a sponsorship level badge, which for the amount of food and like free stuff they're giving you is actually, I think, a pretty good deal. Like most sponsor level badges and stuff like that, like give you like a bag that's like a collectible item and maybe like a special lanyard and like a pin, and that's all you get if you do sponsorship level stuff.
Yep.
Which is why I never go for it. Like this, if you were a type of person who likes food and alcoholic beverages, you could probably make your money back just by eating in the con suite and drinking there.
And drinking yourself under the table every night. Yep. So yeah. Again, so that was kind of the availability of food at the hotel. The Hotel 8 also had a full-on restaurant that was definitely doing like breakfast service. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many people were taking advantage of it, but it was there if you wanted it.
So yeah, it says complimentary alcoholic beverages. There's no limits. You can have as many as you want, which is kind of pretty awesome, honestly.
Yeah.
It's not something that we would do because we can't. But it's something I would recommend, particularly if you know you want to go to the con. You can like get that easy early bird price.
Yeah. So yeah. Is there anything else to do with it? Oh, parking. Parking is the other thing we usually talk about at this point. So parking, unfortunately, at this event, not free.
It was free at UConn, I thought.
It was free at UConn,
which
I don't
thought
know
was
if that
interesting.
means, yeah, I don't know if that means the hotel's changed policies, or it might be a case of the hotel wants you to pay for parking, but if the con is willing to eat it, they'll make the parking free. That's a behind-the-scenes management talking to hotel kind of decision, con management talking to hotel management decision. So I have no idea, but I did find it interesting.
And Ann, remember, for a furry con, this is basically a non-profit to give money to charity, and I suspect, although I don't know for sure, a portion of badge ticket sales likely do go to the charity also. So they probably are making business decisions about how much money they want to donate to charity.
Yeah.
And I can't understand how they would want to not sponsor parking and donate more money to the charity they're going for, which is awesome.
Yeah, because I think there were 501c, is that the coding? Something like that. 501c, 501.
We are not lawyers.
We are not lawyers.
This is not an interesting conversation.
No, that's fair.
The point is, parking was, I think, $15 per day. We bought a
weekend pass, which was $48 for the full 4 days.
And it would have lasted till Monday. We are driving back Sunday, but it would have lasted till Monday morning. Yeah. So, which is decent enough, I think, for parking. That's about average.
Yeah.
A little bit below.
Yeah, we've certainly paid a lot worse. And the system was relatively simple. You went up to you drove up, the attendant was there. You told them what you wanted. They gave you a thing that you just stuck in your dashboard. And you paid, and at that point, anytime we drove up, they just looked. If we had the thing in our dashboard, which just stayed there all weekend, they would just wave us through. Nice and simple, straightforward.
And it did allow for us to have in and out privileges, which is great for people who were staying off site. Like if we wanted to leave in the middle of the day, we could. We didn't wind up doing that, but it was nice to have the option of being able to leave and come back. I will say space was somewhat limited, and they were running up against that a little bit.
Yes. We very deliberately got there fairly early each day, not counting the...
Well, fairly early. We got there in the morning, generally before 10 a.m., which is very early for some con-goers. Yes, but for us, it's about average.
Yeah, that's very early for a fur con.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them will not have events starting until closer to midday. But that did mean we got parking every day. But I do know they had an overflow space, and there were definitely people having to use that overflow space.
So yeah, because we didn't get there super late any days, we can't really comment on the difficulties of parking. It is something for which I do think there was a bit of miscommunication with the con and the hotel about how much overflow parking there would be, what it would cost, where it was going to be. All of that's pretty standard, I think, just for hotel communications and stuff like that. It's not really that big a deal, but probably did make parking a bit of a struggle for some people.
I suspect it did. But for us, and again, only speaking from our personal experience, parking was okay.
And I will say, as we might talk about this throughout the episode as well, the furry community is a community that's very sensitive of the fact that they have people on all ends of the financial spectrum attend their con. There are some people there who have $10,000 fursuits, who have a lot of disposable income, and there are some people there who can't or are unable to live independently, although there's nothing wrong with that, and don't have a lot of disposable income.
Yeah. There's also going to be plenty of people who are, living paycheck to paycheck, and, this is the one thing they can do in a year to, express who they feel they are. And that is a very valid thing for them to do.
And I do think the furry community is generally pretty cognizant of that fact, and they do try to make sure that stuff is available for people to participate at pretty much all levels of financial interest. Yeah. Obviously, it's still an event. You still have to pay for a badge, but they do generally try to make it so that if it's going to be a financial struggle for you to attend a con, you can still find a way to do it. We've seen that here, and we've seen that at the other two furry cons we were at.
Yeah. I would like to quote one of the panelists, specifically, which were they were giving advice to everybody on, if this is your first event. Their comment was, if you cannot afford to go across the road to the Kroger, buy yourself some bread and some peanut butter to make sure you're eating at least something this weekend, tell me and I will buy it for you. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a completely genuine offer.
Yes.
So yeah.
So yeah, it's nice to see that level of inclusivity. It is a bit disappointing that you do have paid parking on lot, though. I do get why they're not paying for it, but it is something that, especially because they're not in a city center, it would be nice if it was free.
It would be nice if it was free, but again,
If you're negotiating a hotel contract, you've got to make some cuts somewhere, and I understand that.
Yeah. So, at this point, I think we're up to the chronological order.
Yeah. I will say one pro tip as we get into analyzing the con, and this is generally true of all furry cons because they support a charity. Just as a pro tip, go to the ATM if you want to support the charity and get cash.
Yeah.
Because they take cash. They also kind of take card, but most of the furry cons we've been to don't really have the card or QR code easily accessible. So it's just easier to have cash on hand because they have a lot of events where you can donate, typically by just passing a hat or bucket around.
Yep. And
that's great, but you need cash.
Yeah.
Preferably
smaller cash.
Yes, smaller cash, lower bills, so you can donate a little bit over the weekend. And it helps to, if you take it out of the ATM also, because then you can just budget for how much you're spending that weekend.
Yeah.
So if you want to take out $100 bill or $100 in entirely once, the bank will think you're going to a strip club, but it will also give you a lot of money you can donate throughout the weekend.
Yeah. Or you can do what I did and just go to an ATM and deal with the fact that you were stuck with nothing but 20s all weekend.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that again, just because again, fives are what you probably want at most furry cons, because that gives you the freedom to kind of manipulate the currency quantities as you see fit.
Not like go to the bank and ask for $200 entirely in ones, and making them count it for you too. Get there, like out $1 bill at a time.
I mean, we live in a small town. A town so small that when I opened my bank account there, they asked me if we have banks in England.
And that's why they need to learn how to count.
I really hope nobody from our town actually listens to this podcast.
Was that joke too dark?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
So, let's move on.
So yeah, recommendation, bring cash. They also do take card though. So we'll now get into us at the con. So we did decide to make this one a 4-dare because furry cons typically have a day 0 on Thursday night, because I do think furry cons revolve around the fact that they do not want people driving drunk. So they build in time on Thursday for people to get there and Monday for people to leave, which is smart. More cons should do that.
Yep, very wise. So we drove down on Thursday, left work, got on the road. Nothing too complicated there. This one's about a 4-hour drive for us.
And Thursdays at most cons are called day 0s a lot of the time. That just means that they're the day before the con officially starts that has kind of bonus content and material. And for this con, like a lot of cons, day 0s aren't technically ticketed events. Like for the most part, everyone who's there has a badge. But if you wanted to go to most cons on a Thursday, they don't badge check or anything and allow you to go to the events for free, in part just because, I guess, if you wanted to get a vibe of a con before buying a ticket, you could go on Thursday night, see if you like it, and then buy a ticket the next day.
So the interesting thing about this one is because they were doing, the Thursday day 0, they had their badge pickup in the main entrance hall of the
atrium lobby?
Yeah. Because of the way this hotel is constructed, they've got effectively the room check-in part on one side, and then there's a separate entrance space if you're just going into the convention side. Mm-hmm. They do connect, and it's very easy to walk between the two, inside the building, but you can get straight into the convention space. So they had their badge pickup there, whereas the rest of the weekend it was upstairs, which I found interesting.
Yeah, I was a bit confused on why they did that. I didn't really talk to any of the con staff about that decision. It did mean that the hallway upstairs for most of the con space, which we did not spend a lot of time in, to be fair, was quite crowded. They were also having air conditioning problems up there, which is not on them. But it did mean that was kind of compounded by the fact that there were a bunch of people trying to pick up registration in the hallway for most of the day.
Yeah. But the one thing I will say is their registration staff were efficient.
They were.
Insofar as when we got there, we saw I'm not going to lie, a honking big line for registration that was kind of snaking around part of the building. And we thought, oh boy, this is going to take a while.
So I sat down because I can't wait in lines due to my disability.
Yep.
I did find out later that they did have line bypass for people who can't do that. I not see that on their website, but they do have it, so that's good.
Have it. It's a thing that I think should be slightly better advertised.
Yeah, or an accessibility line or like a sign that says accessibility.
Yeah, but that line actually moved pretty quick. I was probably waiting somewhere in the 10-15 minute range.
Yes. And again, that's like not long enough for it to be terribly bad on my disability. So
yeah.
I sat down, waited for you to get to the front of the line. It's pretty chill. We got through relatively quickly. And I will say when we got there, I think just happened to be a time period where it was particularly busy.
Yeah.
For most of the other times that day, it was like maybe a 2-minute wait, and the line was like maybe a quarter of how long it was when we got there. I think we just got there at a time when everyone got off work, so it was a bit more crowded then.
Yeah, I think we basically just hit them at a bit of a spike, and that's, again, props to the people running registration. You did a fantastic job.
They did, and they were having like fun, and we're excited to see people come in, and it's always great to have that because you have that great first con experience with the registration person.
Yeah,
make a world of difference for how excited you are about your weekend.
It really does. Like they did a fantastic job.
And I will say, I was feeling a bit iffy that day, which is not on the con at all. I think it's mostly just the con last weekend, which the previous episode talks about, was so badly run that I was just in a kind of state of paranoia that this con was going to be that badly run.
Yeah.
It was not at all. It was fantastically run.
Yeah, like for the most part, the high-level organization of this con, I'm very happy with.
Yes. And the small things we're mentioning as we go along are just kind of small nitpick things.
Yeah.
Like any con's going to have that level of problem, like the registration line being long or the air conditioning going out upstairs, which is not anyone's fault.
Or that one flickering light bulb.
Yeah, that light bulb was haunted, but that wasn't on the con either.
We'll get to that.
Well, maybe we'll do a ghost theme next year.
Yeah. I don't know if they've announced next year's theme yet.
They might have it closing. We did leave before closing today, mostly because we have a 4-hour drive back.
Yeah. We want to get back to our dog.
Yes.
So once we picked up our badges, did we do anything other than the MST3K panel?
We only did the MST3K panel. We did go around, explore the con space, and just get everything set up.
Yeah,
sit high.
I describe it as getting our con legs.
Yeah, getting our con legs in, where we get used to the space and the vibes of the con, who's going to be there.
Yeah, figuring out like where they've set each individual panel room and all of that kind of stuff.
I will say, day zeros at other cons, as you kind of mentioned before, tend to be pretty poorly attended. There's maybe like, a dozen people there or so. This, like, a lot of people were there already.
Yeah.
It was pretty full.
Yep.
Which, was good and fun to see.
Yeah, a lot of people taking time off work for this one.
Yeah.
I would say. So the main thing that we did, and the reason we drove down Thursday rather than Friday, partly because it meant we didn't have to get up stupid early on Friday, which
because they do have a lot of programming.
Was for a Mystery Science Theater Fur 1000 panel. There are a lot of these puns. Please enjoy them all.
One of the furry cons is called Further Confusion.
Of course it is.
Yep.
So, Mystery Science Theater 3000 is, of course, the classic show in which a bunch of people sit and mock a terrible movie. That kind of sums it up. A Mystery Science Theater 1000 panel is exactly that. They play you a movie. You're going to watch it as a big group. You are going to laugh at it.
Yes.
And in particular, there is a panel of people playing a drinking game. The rules for that drinking game are established in part by the audience and how much money they donate to charity.
And also a fun tip about furries, they will donate money to charity for fun all the time because they're awesome. Yeah. So like pretty much anytime they like set a goal in one of these panels, 100% they're going to meet it.
Yeah.
Like if no one else does it, like somebody will just come up to the stage and they're like, oh, we only got $520 and we need $1,000. Somebody will be like, I'm donating $480 now. That happens more frequently than you think.
That's an exaggeration.
It's not that much of an exaggeration. I've seen it happen before. It didn't happen at this con, but it did happen other ones.
Yeah. So at that point, I chipped in $20 to make one of the rules of the drinking game: drink anytime somebody dies.
Which is kind of an in-joke at this point, because the first one of these panels we went to was for Ghost Ship, and you kept complaining the whole movie that no one was dying, even though like they should have died by that point in the movie because the pacing was so off.
Yeah, if you've seen Ghost Ship, you know how awful the pacing in that movie is. Mm-hmm. There is a character in particular who is so obviously going to die that the fact it takes over an hour and a half for it to happen is just ridiculous. Mm-hmm.
And these panels are very well attended. So they have, FurryCons tend to have like a group of, I'm just going to call them entertainers, who go around in their persona and do tons of paneling programming. I'm not going to remember all of their names.
No, I'm not going to remember all of the names either, but there is a collection of them.
Yes. They vary from con to con. There might not be the exact same at all the cons, and some of them have completely different ones. I imagine if you go like to FurryCons in California or Arizona, they'll have a completely different set of furry entertainers.
Yep.
But they basically do a lot of panel programming and are generally kind of awesome. And if you mesh with them, it makes FurryCons fantastic.
Yeah.
And we do. So
we do, I think.
Mesh, we like their humor.
One of them was definitely flirting with me for half the weekend, but
I'm going to let you guess if you were at the con who that was.
Yeah. Though the other thing that's going to confirm it for you if you're at the con, him flirting with me was not a high bar to clear.
Yep.
So, that panel was an absolute hoot. It always is. The only issue is, I think they picked the wrong movie.
Yeah, the movie was actually good. It was weird.
Yeah. Traditionally, you pick a bad movie. This was actually a good movie.
Yeah, like people got distracted from making fun of the movie because they were actually interested in it.
Yep.
Which was very interesting.
In case everybody's curious, the movie was Late Night with the Devil.
Yeah, it was good. It was very masterfully done.
Yeah.
But it was a way for me, who doesn't like horror, to watch a horror movie in a setting where the stakes are out of it, so I could actually enjoy it.
Yep.
And also have fun doing the scavenger hunt part, because as you make drinking rules throughout the night, people on stage drink more and more because there's a drinking game that they all follow. You can also play along with it in the audience if you want to too. It's a +18 con. If you want to drink along with them, you can. You drank your energy drink along with them.
Yes, I drank my caffeinated beverage, which is probably a bad idea. But
just try to get them drunk, and it's very fun to memorize one of the rule, drink anytime you see an animal or something like that, which was one of the rules. Mm-hmm. And then just spot animals throughout the film if you're bored by it. It's a great game to play, and then just shout "animal drink" over and over again. It's very fun.
Yeah, which also means if you know in advance, so they get you to suggest a few of the rules before telling you what the movie is.
Yeah.
Specifically because there's a couple of these that if you know what the movie is, you can make some rules that will kill them.
Yeah. My favorite, I think, are the vague rules. Somebody put in, I think, $20 for drinking anytime there's sexual tension, which is just vague enough that you can just shout it whenever and it's funny. So that was a great rule.
Yeah. I believe the line was, "Which of you monsters yelled that?"
That was me, actually.
Yeah, it was. And we're not going to tell you the context of why you yelled that.
No, that is not appropriate for this podcast.
So.
They also had the charity there. Mm-hmm. So the people from the Wolf Charity, which you can look up online because it's not in the schedule and it's not cooperating online, but there's a Wolf Charity in Indiana that should narrow it down some.
Yep.
They had 2 staff members who were very game to attend a furry convention but never had before, who just hung out with most of the programming throughout everything, and they were great. I loved them.
They were, yeah.
And they were on stage for this panel, and I don't think they had any idea what it was before they were there.
They did not know what they were letting themselves in for, and then they heard the amount that panel raised, and geese. Sorry. Yeah, they heard the amount that panel raised, and
for reference, Geese just passed. He doesn't just say geese randomly.
I kind of do, but
that's fair.
But yeah, and they didn't quite cry, but they were very pleasantly surprised.
Well, they were in furry gear for part of the weekend too. One of the main organizers, I think, was given an ear and tails and just wore it all weekend, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's going to happen at furry conventions.
Yep.
One of that staple of entertainers that we mentioned for this particular convention is not a furry himself. He is a lawyer who was writing a blog about furries and some drama that had been happening in the furry fandom because he just thought it was interesting from a legal perspective. Got invited to come to a furry con to talk about it because some furries found the article and thought it was interesting, and has basically been stuck with them ever since.
He kind of got adopted.
Yeah. So yeah, again, furries are just aggressively welcoming people, and it's really nice. Yeah, so that was our Thursday night. Relatively simple, relatively easy.
Nice way to ease into a con, and I do think it was worth going up that Thursday just for that panel because it's one that eases you into the con, makes it less stressful getting there the next day, and it's something that is just fun. It's fun to collectively make fun of a movie together. It's just great. And that particular group of entertainers does do a great job of bringing the crowd together. That's a group of geese.
That is more geese, yeah. Hi, guys.
Other events they had on at that time were furry karaoke that happened throughout the weekend, and something called Anachrony's Singing Apocalypse, which I don't know what that is, but it seems cool. There's probably a descriptor in here. Because I will say one of the things that was nice that we forgot to mention, they printed very extremely nice programs.
Yeah, like with timetables and details about what all the convention events are. Like, really nicely done. With in-jokes. Because, so, I'm going to stop at this point to talk about convention theming.
Mm-hmm.
Theming is a thing. Most conventions will obviously be a furry convention, a steampunk convention, or whatever. The individual year will also frequently have a theme.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, the theme is basically irrelevant.
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
It's just kind of there. There might be like one panel devoted to it, but that's it.
Mm-hmm. Like again, at the Steampunk Con we were at a couple of weeks ago, the theme was heroes and villains. And for the most part, it wasn't a particularly big part of the con. They had that villain competition. That was about it, relatively speaking. A couple of other bits and bobs.
I know they dress up as villains, and I think some of the stuff was tailored to the theme. But it was a lot of the kind of same stuff we expected from a Steampunk Con.
Whereas the convention this time was kind of themed around Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And among other things, that program has "Don't Panic" written in large friendly letters on the cover.
Mm.
The opening paragraph in the front of the guide is the opening paragraph of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but modified to be specifically related to the Furry Con. Half the panel names are jokes related to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Some of the panelists worked in sci-fi themes into their stuff. Like some of the game show panels we went to had sci-fi themes because it was a sci-fi themed con, which was awesome.
Yeah.
I just think it helped that you really liked the theme.
Yeah, I like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
You like sci-fi generally, because you're a nerd.
I do. This is fair. But again, I've been listening to Hitchhiker's Guide since before I was old enough to understand it. That's not an exaggeration. Side note, the best version of Hitchhiker's Guide is the original radio
Oh
show.
my
Don't
god,
let anybody tell you
stop
different.
being a nerd.
So, the reason I like it is it's the one I
Shut
grew up
up!
with. So, yeah, so the people responsible for the theming on the con, good job. Like, I actually felt like the theme mattered, which I very rarely do at a convention.
I do, and it's nice having that, I think, emergence generally. Because it's fun when you're at a certain type of con, and in addition to being at that type of con, you're kind of also at another type of con or something else. It felt like a hybrid between furries and sci-fi, and you don't really get to see that a lot.
Yeah.
Which is pretty damn cool.
Yeah. Yeah, like a lot of fun, very silly, just great job overall. So, then we move on to Friday.
Friday.
So wake up, get dressed. Do you want to talk costumes? Because we actually learned something we realized something very interesting at this convention.
Did we?
Okay, we kind of knew it before, but
It's mostly just kind of embarrassing.
that's fair.
No, it's not. I mean, you can talk about it. It's fine.
That's fair. So you were a little more nervous on Thursday, and we think that's at least in part because
Last week's con was chaos and annoying and badly organized.
yeah, and partly you weren't in a ball gown.
Yep.
You weren't in any kind of elaborate costume. You were in a very nice dress.
And people still compliment me on that dress.
Yeah, but you were in a dress that you could teach in.
Yep.
Whereas once Friday rolled around and you were in costume, you felt more comfortable. And there are a lot of furries in particular, but this is true of most fandoms. People feel more confident and more comfortable when they are dressed in a way that makes them feel like themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like yourself in a giant ball gown.
Generally, yes. And this was a particularly giant ball gown, so you were doing a thing that we haven't talked about as much on this podcast so far, which is called being a handler.
Yes,
You
I was
want to
your
explain
handler
what that
on
is?
Friday. So, for a lot of outfits at conventions, they are not practical. They are not particularly designed with the maneuverability and the getting from place to place in mind. They are designed to look good. And this dress looked fantastic, but it had a train. For anybody who's not aware, the train is the additional bit of fabric out the back of the dress that trails along the floor. And we were at a convention with a bunch of people with extremely limited vision.
Yeah.
Which meant anytime we wanted to move between panel rooms, I had to pick up the back of that train, hoist it up in the air, get it off the floor, and make sure that nobody stepped on your dress. And for a lot of furries, they will also have a handler whose job is to make sure they don't bump into anything. Mm-hmm. And that's not their only job, but that's an important thing that they need them to do.
And they did have somebody, I think, on Friday, because it was the first official day of the con, just directing everyone to where the elevator was in case you couldn't use the stairs because you were either in a fursuit or in a giant ball gown.
Yep.
We decided to use the stairs anyway because elevators terrify us.
Yeah.
That's a separate conversation, though.
Yeah. Again, at this point, I'm comfortable being your handler. I've done it quite a few times. But if you are going to a convention in a impractical costume, be aware you might need a friend.
Yep. But it is something for which I do appreciate the furry community because they are extremely respectful of people's space. They get that costumes are big and important. So generally when I was walking around a hallway, everyone yielded space to each other. It was extremely respectful. It was kind of awesome, really.
Yeah. Again, it's nice to see. And again, I think a lot of it is that those costumes are art and everybody knows they are. And while you weren't in a fursuit, you were clearly in a elaborate dress,
mm-hmm.
and they appreciated the fact that, okay, I'm going to walk around this, I'm not going to touch this without permission, now I am going to be respectful.
Yeah.
Which we always appreciate.
And by the way, I was the air fairy from Neopets, because Neopets are animals, sometimes anthropomorphic animals. I'm not going to get into Neopets lore on this podcast, because otherwise I will go off on that tangent, and it's going to be way too long. But I like to wear Neopets-related costumes to furry cons because there's typically a Neopets-related panel. There was one this time. We did not go to it because we were doing other stuff, but I appreciate Neopets representation. It's a great 90s and 2000s internet game that still kind of sort of works. I'm glad to be in a community where people know what that is, because it's pretty niche.
It is.
But you feel that all the time with stuff, though.
Oh, constantly.
So let's get into the actual con. So stuff started at noon on Friday, which is pretty typical for an opening con. They typically don't do the whole day Friday because they know people still need the time to get there if they didn't get there on Saturday. Thursday. Con punch drunkness.
Yep. So we started with opening ceremonies, which, it's interesting, a lot of cons will actually have events before opening ceremonies, which I think kind of misses the point of opening ceremonies.
Yeah, I'm always confused about opening ceremonies generally, because half the time they have it at just random times on a Friday. Sometimes they have it on a Thursday on that day zero. It's very confusing generally. That said, it's never really been an event you need to attend. It's fun to get you hyped for the con, but it for the most part just repeats information that's on their website or other places.
Yep. They'll usually sort of say, here's our guests, here's kind of some of the stuff we're offering, go do this. Again, in particular at FurryCons, they're going to hype charity a lot.
Yes.
Because that's mostly the goal of the con, is to raise as much money as they possibly can for the charity. Whatever that charity may be.
Which, they probably should put more of the name of their charity places, because I can't find it in this, but that's fine.
It also depends when they locked it in.
Yeah, I don't know if that was relatively recent or they had to get a different charity sponsor. I imagine with 2 bomb threats that weren't their fault previous years, they might have trouble locking down a charity at this point. And we do know this charity unfortunately lost one of their sponsors by attending this event, which is shitty.
Yeah, that sucks. Language.
I know. I don't think anyone's going to tip the censors, though.
That's fine. Sorry, we did tick the box on the form that says this podcast does not contain adult language.
We didn't say it in the first minute. We're fine.
Yeah. So, yeah, that does in fact suck.
Yes.
But based on what we saw over the weekend, I don't think that charity is going to be wanting for money for a while.
which is great. They also mentioned at opening ceremonies a couple things. One thing I thought was interesting is they tried programming before noon this year, because furry cons tend to go late. They don't tend to have a lot of programming in the morning. And I will say, I actually would encourage cons to do this, because there are people like us who like to attend events when there are fewer crowds. And it's great to have that morning time spot as a con goer who prefers it when it's a little bit quieter, to have panels and events that, while they're not as well attended, are really useful for people who can't really do the overcrowded panels in the middle of the day. So I highly encourage that and hope they keep doing that.
Yes, I would absolutely love more early morning paneling. Thank you. But yeah, so midday Friday, that was absolutely, pretty basic.
Do you remember literally anything else about it? No.
No.
It's okay.
It's opening ceremonies. That's usually how it goes.
Opening ceremonies mostly introduces the guests. You kind of sit down, you cheer at a bunch of stuff. It's pretty cool. Yeah. But it is fun to kind of sit down in a room and just cheer and get hyped for the con with everyone. So after that, in the same room, and I do want to emphasize some things that this con did well, that the con last weekend did not.
Yep.
Which is, they let you stay in rooms between panels. They also just let you into empty rooms throughout the day. Yep. They pretty much didn't care where you went, as long as you didn't, destroy the hotel.
Yep. Which
is great. I like being able to go where I need to go, sit down and relax, and then just wait for the panel to start.
Yep.
And for the most part this weekend, I got to do that as much as I wanted, and it was fantastic and such a great relief after last weekend when I was continuously kicked out of different rooms and kind of not very nicely treated.
Yeah. Now, again, here, basically the only time they were going to kick you out of a room is if they needed to do a bunch of rearranging of chairs and setup and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That was it.
For main events, sometimes throughout the day, because they had some events that required more or less chairs because they had dances in there. And the furry dance-off thing, I'm going to forget the name of that I know they care about. I think it's just called the dance competition, which we'll talk more about later. They cleared the room for that. But other than that, you can pretty much just go in rooms and sit down whenever you wanted. I love that. Please keep doing that. It's amazing.
Don't clear rooms. It sucks. Nobody likes it. Yeah, that was great.
We did forget one thing about opening ceremonies, which is what you were doing during it.
Oh, that. Yes, this hotel actually has pretty good Wi-Fi that you don't have to pay anything for, which is super useful if you have to take a 2-hour work call in the middle of the day.
That got rescheduled to be conflicting with opening ceremonies after we booked these tickets.
Yeah, it was. When I was told to save the time, I was told 10 till 12. It ended up being 11 until 1.
So if you happen to spot a hunched over British man on the front row of the right side of the room at a laptop, he was not being rude. He was just pretending to be in a meeting.
I listened to everything in that meeting.
Okay. If Richard's work is somehow listening to this, he listened to everything in that meeting.
I answered. If
the Accents Reels work profile is listening to this, he listened to everything in that meeting.
I did. But yeah. I mean, to be fair, you also made use of that Wi-Fi later in that day.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
So.
But no one bothered him, which we appreciated.
Yep, very much appreciated that. So yeah. Next up, what was next? Oh yeah, next was, so we stayed in the room and attended, is this your first furry con or your first furry
Your first furry con is what it's technically called. And this is something furry cons actually do a bunch, which I really appreciate, is if you're new to the furry community, most cons that are in the furry community have this panel that you can go to and understand more about cons and furry culture.
Yeah.
They do some basic stuff about attending cons, which we don't need, but the stuff about fursuiters and how to interact with them and stuff like that is useful to somebody who's new to furry culture.
Yep,
absolutely. That said, we've been to 3 cons, so it didn't really teach us anything new this time. We mostly just kind of were at it because there wasn't really anything else to do that time of the day, and it doesn't hurt to go in and have kind of a good time just listening to people talk about it.
Yep.
They do it in a fairly engaging way, so you can still kind of have a good time if you listen to it.
It involves a lot of yelling.
Yeah.
Which, given the particular people who they had, doing events at this con, there was going to be a lot of yelling regardless.
Generally, yes. And we did stay in main events for most of that day, just because they had a lot of paneling on that we liked. So I think that's part of why we stayed for this. And no one kicked us out that entire time. We were allowed to sit there for close to 6 hours, which is kind of impressive.
In that room for about 6 hours, barring one of us running out to take a bathroom break or grab some water. And incidentally, one thing I remembered at this convention that I have a habit of forgetting: hydrate.
Yep. And because it's a furry con and people do dehydrate faster in fursuits, because as you can expect, they're hot, they have water stations everywhere. Take advantage.
Yep. So yeah, that was, and again, perfectly, good panel for what it was. Mostly we were there because we wanted to hang on to the seats.
Yep. And it was vaguely amusing, and there wasn't really anything else on that we could do. But it was nice. And I do like that for cons have that as kind of an intro.
More cons should have it.
Yeah, I honestly think all cons should have something like that. It's just like an intro to what. Because when we started attending conventions 2.5 years ago,
somewhere in that ballpark,
before we became addicted to them, I became addicted to them pretty immediately. There was a learning curve to it. Like, it took, I think, a couple conventions for us to really understand like how we operate in that space. And some of that's going to come down to individual preference, because what I like doing at cons might not necessarily be what you like doing at cons. But even knowing how to find what you like doing at cons is something that takes a bit of skill.
And again, other things like etiquette when asking somebody for a photo. Like, we're all socially awkward. We don't know how to walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, I like your costume. Please, can I take a picture?"
Mm-hmm. And what's nice about that panel is it also teaches you how furries gesture, because they typically can't talk in their fursuits. Some can, but a lot can't. So understanding their gestures, like when they're asking for a hug or something like that, is really useful.
Yep. The reminder: cosplay is not consent, which is really depressing that we have to give, but cosplay is not consent.
It's not, but I don't think anyone listening to this would assume that it was.
No, but always worth repeating.
So next was a series of improv stuff that took up most of the afternoon, starting with Iggy's improv workshop.
Yep.
There were a lot of improv panels this weekend. We tend to like improv panels a lot because they're an excuse to be creative. And we tend to like these ones in particular because they allow audience participation, which we love, both because we like participating and because it's just kind of awesome to see other people at cons get up there and like deliver those great liners and have that kind of great con moment where they're the center of attention, all eyes on them, and they're really happy. Like, those moments almost make me cry sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of them are really, really good. So kind of a series of those. So Iggy's improv workshop was first, which was basically have you improv before? Good. If you haven't, here's how you do it. Kind of the basic improv rules, but
most people in there had already improv before, including us.
Yep.
They might just be in there because they like improv. I think there were a couple new people in there, though.
A few new people.
And the nice thing about that one is for most of the other panels, you have to kind of volunteer and then go up on stage to do something. This was a little bit less intense than that. You could just improv with like the person next to you just to practice,
Yep.
Which I think is more useful for people who like are a bit more stage shy or don't have a lot of experience. And that was, I think, really good for them to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I thought he ran the panel pretty well.
He did. What was that followed by?
That was followed by Iggy's improv hour.
Okay, yeah.
Which I think was just
series of improv games.
Yeah, I think that was improv games that were more on stage.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to look at the description. Also, just as a heads up, people have weird names because they're all personas. Like, so they're not typically people's real name.
Yeah, so that was Iggy the dinosaur.
Yes. He was not dressed as a dinosaur. Not everyone with a persona is dressed up.
No.
So yeah, that was his friend's improv show. So that wasn't one where we were participating. That was mostly just, I think, him and his friends doing games.
Yeah.
But they did a good job. And this was games that you don't typically see in improv as much. So I'm trying to remember some of the more unique ones they did.
The longer form ones.
Yeah. Do you remember any of them?
No. Like, I remember laughing a lot.
I do too. I'm trying to think. There were some kind of unique ones in there, but sorry, I can't. It's also probably not worth explaining them because it's kind of hard to explain how improv games work. If you've seen Whose Line or similar improv-based shows, they have the basic scenes from a hat.
Yeah. Well, those they
World's Worst.
Those they actually did at the Whose Line panel.
They did that at the Whose Line panel too, but they also did some other ones there that I think were a bit more unique also. So after that was the Whose Lion Is It Anyway charity panel, which is another pun, which is more of the same, but this one was audience participation based.
Audience participation, and this was a hoot.
And they do try to, at this, also put in a lot of games of various skill levels such that everyone can kind of participate at the level that they want to.
Yeah.
Because some of the games require a little bit more skill than other games.
So, you've got classic things like World's Worst, and they'll basically just get up a whole bunch of volunteers at once, basically say, okay, all of you, everybody who stuck your hand up, yeah, you can all come out to the stage. You say your one, world's worst, whatever it was.
Plumber.
You say world's worst plumber. You say your joke, or you step forward. You say your joke. You step back. And so, they can get through a lot of those.
And this was a +18 convention, so people did get a bit raunchier in these panels, which was fun. Nothing like over the line, just a little bit more fun.
Just a little bit more fun.
And the nice thing about Questions Only or World's Worst, which are 2 games you like play in that lineup format, is if you get up on stage and just like, I'm not really feeling this, I can't think of a joke, I'm feeling kind of uncomfortable, you don't have to say anything.
Yeah.
You just like stand there and then sit down when it's over, and you got up on stage that time, which is already an achievement in itself.
Yep.
And maybe next time you could say something.
Yeah.
There's so many geese parents on that lawn.
Good. Yeah, we're in goose pairing season, which we very much appreciate.
So we were both on stage, I think, for that one.
Yep. Yeah, I did Questions Only, which is a game where you're only allowed to respond to what the other person said with a question. And they have to respond back to you with a question. Based on some kind of theme prompt from the audience. And of course, because it's coming from the audience, it's going to be weird.
Yep. And I was in a game called New Line. I barely remember the game because I think my session of that game kind of broke down due to the fact that
you are an absolute monster.
I didn't expect it to like murder the host quite as much as it did. So yeah, my version of that is basically that game's one you play where you say a line and then the person says new line and then you say a different line that's like similar to that first line. I'm not going to go into detail about it. The point is I said something and then that made the person who was running the game laugh so hard that it was kind of difficult for him to finish my round of the game. So yeah.
Yep.
Which is not on anyone.
Yeah, you were getting a bunch of compliments for pretty much the rest of the weekend after doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you did great.
Yeah. I mean, I was also in a giant poofy blue ball gown, which made me pretty memorable, and you did have to help me get off the stage.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, nice thing about Furry Cons is because a lot of people need assistance, no one bats an eye when you're helping me out.
Oh no, if they see somebody dashing towards the stage and then like take the hand of the person in the giant elaborate dress, they're like, yep, that's their handler, okay.
Yep.
Nobody cares. Which is extremely helpful.
Oh yeah, and I think it was the beginning of that panel where I was on my computer. So
yep.
As somebody who goes to cons, sometimes they have ticket releases and you have to like go get events and sign up for them in a certain time period. And when those events open at 5 o'clock, you have to make sure that you are there to get tickets.
So yeah, so that's a month away you're planning for that?
A month away. This is a board game con where they have individual ticketed events for various board games and RPGs you can play. I like to sign up in advance just to guarantee that we can get the tickets that we want. So we'll review that one in a couple months in May.
I thought it was in April.
No, that one's in May. May 5th through, it's the first weekend of May.
Okay. Anyway.
Stop thinking about the con schedule. I have it memorized. You don't.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, so. After Whose Line? What was it?
It was masturbation, and to be clear,
yes, we know he knows what it sounds like.
Yes,
that's the joke.
It's very much a pun, but it is mass debation, as in debate.
It is a panel about debating very silly things.
Yes.
Again, based on suggestions from the audience.
And this was upstairs. We were able to get into the room early and relax. There was a panel on rope bondage, which I am going to say. 101.
Which was apparently very popular.
Quite
very well
popular. People were flooding that room, which we were not there, but awesome that happened.
Yeah. Again, if you're going to do that stuff, make sure you know how to do it properly. So, masturbation, very, very silly panel, a lot of fun, because the entire point is you're just trying to find the weirdest stuff to argue against the other stuff.
I do kind of wish they allowed for more audience participation in that. I get why they can't, because a lot of people have trouble speaking for 5 minutes. I'm just not one of those people. I don't have any trouble speaking for 5 minutes because my job requires me to do that frequently.
Yep.
If you can give me a topic, I can talk about it for 5 minutes. I might not necessarily say accurate things, but I can definitely talk about it for 5 minutes.
They flat state in that panel you are not required to say anything that's actually accurate. You just need to talk. So I'm trying to remember. We started with Bandit from Bluey
Mm-hmm.
against Pyramids.
Pyramids.
Just to give you a sense of how silly it gets.
And I was amused because I asked Iggy, who did one of the previous panels, was doing a show called Iggy's Pyramid later that night, and he was defending Pyramid. So I asked him about his show just to give him a chance to like plug it in because it was funny.
Yep. He left the room and came back in character as the game show host version of himself.
Yes.
Plugged the thing, then left the room again and came back in as the panelist version of himself.
Because he has different, I guess, personas that he plays when he's in different roles. But everyone in the room was also confused by that because they were like, yeah, Iggy doesn't really announce when he's in a different persona. So we just kind of have to get...
Sometimes he does it with costume changes, but he didn't have the other costume handy.
Yep.
So...
And then I think we had Bluey versus Armed Robbery.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we ended with, I don't even remember.
I can't remember what the last one was.
It's a very silly debate panel. You have fun. It's another one that's charity run, so you can like pay money to vote for whichever side you think should win.
Yep.
And they sometimes also have people draw art in the audience and auction the art off during the panel.
And whoever pays the most money, which again, money going into the charity, gets to decide who won the debate.
Yep. It's very cute and silly and fun.
Yeah. Did we do anything after that, or was that
We did Iggy's Pyramid after that.
Ah, yes. Which again, game show based on, well, the old game show Pyramid, if you've ever seen that. Which, again, it's interesting. Whenever you go to game show panels at cons, which we do a lot, we like game show panels at cons. Most of the time, people have had to make their own software for it, and it's always interesting seeing like the difference in, because some people do a really fantastic job, and for the record, Iggy does a really good job with his stuff. Whereas some people have just kind of slapdashed it together, and you've just got like a PowerPoint that doesn't quite work. Whereas again, like a couple of technical snafus aside of trying to get the audio to play properly and almost deafening the audience at one point. Iggy's Pyramid was great. It was a hoot.
Yeah, I participated in that one.
Yep, and you picked all kinds of posterior.
Yeah, I nearly like got to the very top of the pyramid. I'm not going to explain how pyramid works, but I nearly won like the grand prize if you were on the like actual game show, which if you've seen game shows is hard to do.
You also got the highest score he'd seen.
Yep.
Or you were. So the interesting way that Iggy does his game shows,
which I do really like, is he tries to get as many people participating as possible.
Yeah. Is typically he's picking game shows that are designed for 2 teams of 2 face off against each other, and so he will have 2 of the other sort of con guest regular panel kind of people as team captains functionally, and then bring up members of the audience to be the person who partners with them. And I think that's a really good balance because that gives you audience participation while also having somebody who's done it enough times that they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Because again, I've seen a lot of game shows just because I watched a bunch growing up, so I know how most of these games work. You, just from being from the UK, haven't a lot of the time.
A lot of these game shows didn't make it to the UK or had different names.
And particularly if you're volunteering to be the first guest, you kind of have to see how it runs to get the hang of it a lot of the time.
Yep.
So it does take some people a few more times to kind of get the learning curve, which is just normal. That's how anyone learns anything. But it's nice to have somebody there who already knows how to do it, kind of helping you along if you're a little bit confused on what's going on, which is valid.
Absolutely.
So that's great. And it's also great because these are shorter games. He tries to get up as many audience members as possible throughout the weekend, which is great. And he asks if you've already played a game to maybe wait to see if anyone who hasn't played a game yet gets a chance to play.
Yeah, which is good.
He did ask if we wanted to go against each other in that one later, but we were just like, nah, we'll just do different games this time because you did Password Plus the next day.
I did Password Plus the next day. So yeah, I think that was the last thing we did on Friday?
That ended at 10, and for a furry con that's leaving early, but the night stuff doesn't interest us as much. Every night at a furry con, they do have a dance, pretty much. They have one Friday, Saturday, and Sunday called the Dead Dog Dance, which is still, it hasn't even started yet. So fun for people who are there. But it's not really our style of music or scene, so we don't really go.
Yeah.
But people who do, hopefully have a good time.
Yeah.
So we got home around 11-ish, because that panel did run a bit late.
Yeah.
And a few panels this weekend went over time, but they did have buffering between panels to like allow them to do that.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who did have a panel that overran either asked the next panel guest or the people who were like in charge of that room if it was okay for them to go over a little bit.
Yeah. Which again, leaving rooms empty for like half an hour at a time, I'm never sure about at cons. I think there are pros and cons to it.
Yeah.
So, pro, panels can run over. Like, it gives them a little bit of freedom, it gives them a little bit of leeway, and you've got that. Downside, that is time when those rooms aren't being used when they could be. And I'm never entirely sure which side of that debate I land on, because there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I don't think they made the wrong decision because I genuinely don't know what the right decision is on that one.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult because you want to have enough time for setup between panels, but you also want to do as much stuff as possible, and it gets a bit difficult to kind of see. Their events also, I will say, do the kind of... I'm trying to think about like what to call the two types of schedule you can do. Because you can do a schedule where everything starts like on the hour, or you can like chunk it so that some things start on the hour and some start on the half hour, which is what this con did, similar to Fan Expo last weekend. I don't know which one of those I prefer either. Like, they both have advantages and disadvantages. If everything starts on the hour, it's easier to get between panels. But if stuff starts on like half-hour marks and stuff like that, you don't have awkward breaks for as long if there's nothing in a certain hour that you don't want to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree. And Fan Expo in particular was chunking it up into 15-minute sections.
That was really confusing.
That was weird.
I'm pretty sure everything here starts on the hour or half hour, so at least that's less confusing than that.
Which, again, I think starting on the hour or the half hour is probably the right balance between those two.
Yeah.
So we went back to the Airbnb. We went to sleep.
We did.
I got a burger. It was a really good burger. Then we were up bright and early the next day.
Because you were paranoid about finding parking.
I was right to be paranoid about finding parking.
I don't think I had to be as paranoid as you were, but I am glad we got there at the time we did because I really liked our first panel that day.
Yes.
We got there at like 8. For reference, stuff doesn't start till 9. Yep. We were there like an hour before anything was even happening. Other than
we got parking.
We did get parking. And I do want to say there were 2 things happening. There was the plastic pals thing, which is basically they got a bunch of inflatable like animals that you could like play with in the morning, which is cool.
Again, for any Hitchhikers fans out there, your plastic pal who's fun to be with.
And they had a candy party, which I think was people making bracelets and eating candy, which is also cool.
Yep. We got bracelets just because we
happened to be at the end.
We turned up at the end of that panel because we were going into the next panel, and they were just like, yeah. Have a free bracelet.
We also got 2 Funko Pops.
Yeah, we did.
That people just kind of gave away because that was also like a trading post. It was kind of an all-purpose space that time of the morning.
Yeah.
So people, because we got in at the end of the trading post hour, and they just kind of combined those 2 things into one thing.
Yep.
Just gave us 2 Funko Pops because they did not want them anymore. One of which is a Mr. Mime Funko Pop.
Yeah, you've threatened to just like hide that where I sleep.
I intend to do that.
Oh, great.
So the first thing we actually went to that day was So You Want to Staff a Con or something, which was interesting because I don't think either of us really planned on going to that one. We didn't map it on our schedule. We just kind of impulse did it because we didn't want to wait around for like an hour and a half till the next panel we actually wanted to go to started.
Yep.
And that's just primarily because we do panel at some conventions. I don't know if like staff work is really something we're actually interested in. Not that we don't respect staff. It's just, it would be hard with us with our current work schedules and how many cons we go to staff a con.
Yeah.
Particularly this con because we can't really be around for kind of key loading and unloading hours because it's 4 hours away. But I do like panels like that because it basically just turned into like behind the scenes con stuff. We were just talking with the staff about why they made the decisions they made, what they're doing. And I really, really love those types of panels. If it was just like chat with con staff panel, I would love that if they had that next year.
Yep. Again, it gave us a chance to kind of talk to them and answer the question. Oh, incidentally, do we want to talk costumes for Sunday?
Oh, yeah. For Sunday, we did our new unicorn costumes, which I was excited about.
Yep. So again, you in a giant ball gown and doing effectively a variant of Princess Celestia.
Yes.
And me in a cloak and purple waistcoat and trousers, being kind of pseudo gender flipped Princess Luna. Again, I'm aggressively boring. I'm a straight cis white guy, but I am comfortable enough in who I am that I don't really care if I was gender flipping that costume or not. That makes sense.
And it did mean that we got to play or think about my new favorite song throughout the day, which is called Space Unicorn.
Which she was introduced, you may remember from 2 episodes ago, She was introduced to at a steampunk con. She keeps playing it randomly.
You should definitely look it up.
Anywho. But yeah, so we got into that panel of teens a bit late, so we just kind of stuck at the back.
Yep, which was the only place where my ball gun really fit in that room. But everyone was cool with that.
Yep.
The panel did wind up, I think, being like about maybe 70% staff members and like maybe like 5 normal people who were not staff members.
But again, it was interesting just to chat with them.
It is, and it's interesting that did a pretty good job like having a conversation with people who were there. That's where we learned the term surfer to call us.
Yep. It's also where I was told to email this podcast, so I'm so sorry.
If you've even made it this far, most of them are probably tapped out by now.
If they've got any brains, yeah. There's a joke in there about furries and brains, but I'm not going to make it because I don't think it's actually in any way accurate. They're all evil geniuses.
And they did talk a little bit about the con and like why stuff was spaced in certain rooms and the limitations of that, which is a difficult thing with any con. They talked about how they scheduled panels and how they tried to do a variety of panels, which was very, very cool.
Yep.
They asked us about our con experience when we liked, which was super awesome. And for me, something that's always a really good sign at a con is when you can tell that everyone who works on staff, and remember, pretty much everyone who works for a convention, especially of this size, is going to be a volunteer. If that group of volunteers really bonds and like cares about each other and is nice to each other, that's a really good sign for like the con's health and the health of its management. You could definitely see that in that room at that time period.
Right down to the fact that one of the staffers was talking about the fact that he used to be in a higher position and he realized he was kind of getting a bit overwhelmed and lowered himself to be a lower tier and let somebody else take over what he'd been doing, and that was just good advice.
Yeah.
This is not a thing where you need to be climbing the ladder lickety split. Like,
yeah, I didn't get the sense that the con was really owned by anyone. I'm sorry if it is, but I didn't get that sense. Everyone seemed to like view it as communally bigger than all of them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they just have a board, because again, they were saying that again, with some cons you'll have a board and then a CEO or a boss or whatever, whereas a lot of them are just run by a board, a group together.
So yeah, I want more cons to have panels like that because I really love talking to staff about cons. It's one of my favorite things as a con junkie, I guess, to kind of see the inner workings of cons with how many we go to too.
Absolutely.
So we went from that very nice thing about this con to convention war stories, which is about the less fun parts of cons.
Which again is, at this particular convention, 3 comedians.
Mm-hmm. Who are also con owners or partial con owners or people who work at a lot of cons.
Yep. Basically just telling you funny stories.
Yep.
Very well. Like, again, we went to pretty much every event that, I'll just say the names, that Boozy and Alkali were doing this weekend.
They went to pretty much a thing Iggy did too, just to give him a shout out as well.
Because they're very funny and they're very good at what they do.
Yes.
They do, they know how to entertain a crowd, and they're very good at like judging what stories they should be telling based on the crowd they're in front of. And again, this one was an 18+ con, which meant the stories were, Yeah,
we're not going to like regale in too many of those, but it is interesting to see the behind the scenes stuff. And one thing they did say that we are taking to heart, I think, is a good con. Like, all cons are going to have these stories regardless of what kind of con they are. Mm-hmm. Good cons make sure that people who weren't there do not know about it.
Yeah.
At least until they're making fun of it at another con. Then it's fine for them to know about it.
Yeah, they describe it as the 2-year rule, which is, you can tell everybody the really silly, funny stuff once it's 2 years down the line.
Yeah.
The other person in that panel was
Uncle
Kage, who is the CEO of the... I think he's very proud of the fact that, as of last year, it's officially the biggest FurCon in the world. Mm-hmm. Because he mentioned it quite a lot. But, again, it is a heck of an achievement.
It is. And
we were there.
I want to emphasize we are not somebody who can verify what the biggest FurCon in the world is. Please do not talk to us about that.
Nope.
Because I get the sense that it's a bit contested.
Yep. I suspect there's probably a couple of cons that are pretty close to, having that, and they'll probably keep trying to pit each other for the crown.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, that's just fun.
That's just kind of a fun like rivalry between cons. It doesn't hurt anyone, so that's fine.
Yeah. So that panel was an absolute hoot. I'm glad we went to it.
Mm-hmm. And after that was the fursuit parade. There wasn't a lot on during this programming block, I think, because they realized that the fursuit parade would, one, make it difficult to move around the space, because it does take up most of the main hallway.
Yep.
And also that a lot of people would either want to be in it or want to watch it. So we should probably explain what that is. It's basically what it sounds like.
Yep, fursuit parade is exactly what it sounds like. They basically get most, if not all, anybody who wants to do it, of the people in full fursuits lined up in the hall, or lined up in the main event space, and then they march them around the convention center. The goal of this is to just let everybody parade and show off their cool stuff.
I think it originally started because when FurCon started, people who were working in the dealer's den, who are a lot of local artists who are also part of the furry community, because furries sell a lot to other furries, couldn't see the fursuits in the con because they had to stay in the dealer's den the whole time. People typically don't go into dealer spaces in fursuits just because it's not easy to navigate. You don't want to knock anything over. So they created the fursuit parade as an opportunity for the people who are in the dealer's den at various cons to see fursuits. And now pretty much all furcons have them.
Yeah. And depending on the size of the con, determines how long it's going to take.
Yep. I think we heard, although we were not involved in this at all, that they had like a 500 person limit. It did seem like they had about 500 people.
Somewhere in that ballpark, I'd say, is a good estimate. Again, that was something I overheard somebody else say, so I don't know how accurate that statement is, just to clarify.
Yeah, and we were not involved in the coordination of the fursuits, which, as you can imagine, I'm sure is a task to get them all lined up how they're supposed to be. So I can't say how well they did that, but the parade was fun.
Parade was fun. One real limit of this venue is there's a limited amount of good space to observe it. So our vantage point was okay. We were mostly looking at backs.
Generally, because we didn't know which way they were going to come through at that time. And I also didn't want to be on the main floor concourse, so 2-floor hotel. We were on the balcony of the second floor looking down at the first floor, and this was because I was in a giant ball gown, and I did not want my giant ball gown to be in the way of a fursuit parade.
Yeah.
So we went up there. It was a little bit less claustrophobic. And we could see some of it, and it was pretty cool looking. But we didn't have the best vantage point. But there were 20 cameras on them, so I'm sure if we want to watch it later, somebody has recorded it and put it online.
Definitely.
So.
Now that I am 100% certain about. So, yeah.
After that was Charity Who's Lion.
Yep.
So this is like the previous Who's Lion panel, except it was the comedians doing the performances as opposed to being audience participation.
Yeah. Which again, I generally prefer audience participation, but
they are a group that can carry it.
Yes.
Very few groups can. I've been to a lot of improv panels. You have too. Mm-hmm. Most of them aren't quite at the level of expertise with the craft of comedy that they're able to carry a panel like this by themselves.
This bunch can.
Yeah, they definitely can.
And it was very funny. So I don't know if there's much more we can say about that other than, it was funny. Go, if you had the opportunity to see this bunch, go see them.
So yeah, that was pretty cool. There were a lot of comedy panels this weekend, but they're fun. After that, I think we did Super Password Plus.
Yep. So again, another game show run by Iggy. Again, based on the old game show of Super Password or Password Plus or the. So again, the other thing I like that Iggy does is he frequently tries to theme his game show around the theme of the con.
Yep.
Which
he did, I think, for both Pyramid and this one. Although you were on stage for this one, so
yes, I was on stage for this one. So again, I volunteered, pretty much the first round on this.
And he did pick us well for the first round, which I was nice by, because we were in the room pretty early and clearly wanted to participate. So I think he kind of honored that when he was picking people, which was super nice.
Now and again, so went up and did surprisingly well. Paired up with Alkali, which He insisted when I did that was a mistake, but
You won both of the rounds, I think.
yep, we won 2 rounds working together, and at that point, they asked me to switch off so that somebody else could have a go, which is absolutely fine.
And it's probably not as worth describing like the rules of this game if you've heard of it. Holy I think those are just geese.
Aw.
Yeah, those are definitely geese.
Those are geese. But they were white geese. Sorry.
I did not curse.
You managed to avoid cursing, but that was close.
Sorry, swans are very important to us, which I feel like anyone who's listening to us review a Furry Con podcast will understand.
But we just saw some white geese that for a second we thought were swans.
They were definitely geese.
Yeah.
Otherwise it would make you turn around.
Yeah, otherwise we would be pulling a U-turn right now in order to go back and look at them some more.
Yeah, the swans are important to our relationship. Yes, we realize they're mean. That's not the point. We'll move on.
It's complicated. It's not worth explaining now. So
we're not going to explain to you the rules of Password either. It's exactly like how that game show works if you've seen it. If you haven't, I don't want to bother with that.
Yeah. But again, very well run panel. A lot of fun.
They got a lot of people up again. He was
good
about switching people out. So pretty much everyone in the room who wanted to participate got a turn, which is awesome.
Which I always like.
Then we stayed in that room for I Comedy Better When I Had a Few.
Yep, which is another comedy panel, which again, this is the same bunch as Convention War Story. So this was Boozy, Alkali, and
Uncle Kage.
Uncle Kage, except this time they have alcohol.
Yep. It was pretty much just a continuation of that panel, if I'm being honest.
Same basic principle.
And it might seem like we do a lot of comedy panels at this con, but
there were a lot of comedy panels at this con, and we like comedy panels.
We do. So that's what we did a lot of our time with. So sorry if it seems a little bit samey in terms of that, but comedy and game show panels tend to be some of our favorites, particularly ones that involve audience participation.
Yep. So we did a lot of those at this con because this con had a lot of them. It's interesting that furry cons have a lot of those, or at least the furry cons we've been to. I don't know if that's something. So I'm wondering if at least in part it's because there's not a lot of furry media. So there's relatively little, there's not many TV shows or anything like that they can talk about. Whereas if you go to a sci-fi con, you're going to get panels on this specific sci-fi media, that specific sci-fi media.
Yeah, generally at Furry cons, I find it tends to fall into 3 categories, like game show panels we've seen a lot of, some comedy or improv panels, and they typically have like nature panels.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit more about the panels we did not go to.
At the end,
like we normally do.
Yeah, so again, that was very, very funny. A bunch of stories that we're definitely not repeating on a podcast that is theoretically for all ages.
Yep, and also because it's comedians' material, I kind of want to save some of those stories for people who are actually hearing them live for the first time. So I think they'll enjoy it more.
They will deliver them much better than we would.
Yeah. So after that, we went to Well Technically, which is, for copyright reasons, not actually from the Dropout TV series, but
which is interesting because at past cons we've been to, they just call it Unactually.
Yeah, I don't think it's something they can really sue you for, given that it's like free entertainment that you're playing by yourself. But like, it's cute that they called it something different.
Yeah, and this was the room with the flickery light.
Ghost light.
Yeah, basically just one particular bulb in that room was on the blink. Quite literally, it was just flickering. The only problem was it was the bulb directly over the projector screen.
So this is a room they had to set up with a projector. And I have noticed this about cons with projectors. For whatever reason, even though most con rooms for these hotels where you can rent out convention space for pretty much anything, for any kind of convention you would need, whether it's a fan convention or an academic convention or like a professional convention, you would think that most conventions are probably going to have an event that requires you to have a projection screen to put something up there. And most of them do. But they don't have any spot where you can put the projector such that it actually goes on the screen. And I don't understand why that doesn't exist.
So for this particular panel, they mounted the projector on a chair that was stood on top of a table.
Yep.
Which worked.
It did work. I'm just like, why, when you were building this room, did you not anticipate that this was something you were going to need for your conference room?
Again, why didn't you just hang a projector from the ceiling like a normal... Anyway.
Yeah. And to emphasize that, again, is not on the con, that's on the venue. It's just all venues seem to like forget that people are going to need these for their event.
It's such a common problem that at this point it's hilarious.
Yeah. So because of that, they had to turn the lights off so people could see the projector because it was all otherwise a fairly well lit room. And because of that, that meant that there was one light that for whatever reason decided it didn't want to turn off and alert us whenever it wanted to
Yeah.
throughout the various panels.
So yeah, that light was flickering, and it reached the point on Sunday that I was trying to decipher what it was saying in Morse code.
Yep.
Which again, not on the convention.
No.
If you came to this convention next year, that light will probably have been replaced by then.
If it hasn't, it's definitely possessed by a ghost, and you should definitely try to befriend it because it needs help.
Yeah. Or at the very least, decode what it's saying.
Yes.
But yeah, so, well, technically, it was basically just dumb, actually. Again, this one was another one done with just a panel of guests. And, again, this is one I would have loved to participate in because the theming was something I know about. Whereas several of the guests did not. But they did allow for audience participation. Specifically, if the guests didn't know the answer to the question, they would throw it to the audience, and for a donation to the charity that could be as low as you wanted, it could be, pocket change, you could shout out a guess. And the audience won by a lot.
Yeah. And it was also nice because at that point, people were also just donating dollar bills to people who didn't have them but really wanted to answer. The host of the panel also just donated dollar bills whenever anyone didn't have like cash or anything like that. It was super nice.
At one point, I was just like, so I know what this is, but I'm out of cash. And he was just like, oh no, my wallet, what is happening? Takes money out, throws it in the hat. What do you think it is?
That's what's great about furry cons is just like camaraderie generally. It's just if anyone doesn't have any money but wants to answer, doesn't have like correct denominations of money, other people will spot them, and it's pretty great. So, and it's all for charity, so it was fun.
Exactly. So yeah, that was just, that was fun.
Mm-hmm.
It was a well put together version of that panel, one haunted light bulb aside.
Yep. But light bulb was still haunted the next day though.
Yep. And again, it gave me a chance to lean over and be a persnickety so-and-so with you.
I think you bonded to the person you were sitting next to. I'm sorry that we don't remember your name. Was one of the con staff from earlier, and a couple
if you're listening to this, I apologize.
Yeah, and you were definitely talking to. I'm going to use they them because I don't know what the pronouns are.
Yep.
You were definitely talking to them for a decent chunk of that panel, and you guys were kind of bonding and nerding out, which was super cute to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, the particular bit where we were quibbling with the answer to the question regarding the Halo rings. Side note, that question was definitely wrong. You do not destroy 3 Halo rings in the original trilogy. You only destroy 2. But anywho. So yeah, that was a well done version of that panel. It was fun.
And it's also worth noting that throughout that day after we went to that first panel with the staff members that were on that panel kept saying hi to us both that day and the next day. They were great.
Yep.
It was super sweet of them.
It was. So what was next?
We debated leaving at that point because we were at 9:30.
Yeah.
And for reference, generally when we're at a con, I think generally we like to be back around 11, which is an hour later than we normally do our wind down routine at home.
Yeah.
And we generally kind of like that as a cutoff point.
Yeah. Depending again on what's going on and all that kind of stuff. But
it's not like a hard cutoff point. It's just kind of
again anyway. Aiming to be home somewhere between about 10 and 11 or home or wherever we're sleeping, is usually a ballpark we aim for if the con does run that late. Many of them don't. But yeah, for this one, we didn't want to leave at that point because we were having that giddy con punch drunk feeling we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And we decided, no.
So we had 2 choices. We could do the responsible thing and just get a good night's sleep, or we could stay and do one last panel that was supposed to be an hour and a half. That's what we did.
We were responsible. We went back to the Airbnb.
That is not what we did.
That is not what we did. I am lying to you. Yeah, we stayed for Boozy's Legal Funhouse, which, for anybody not aware,
it's a podcast.
Yep.
We will promote it on this podcast for free. It's more popular than this podcast, I'm sure.
Yep, and it probably should be.
Yes.
But it is Boozy, who is a certified lawyer, explaining legal things to his non-certified lawyer friend Alkaline, and they are both semi-professional comedians, and they are very, very funny.
Yeah. We are not professional comedians and are less funny, so you should definitely listen to them and not us.
Exactly. But
But
yes,
it's basically then just going over like a legal principle. Boozy will explain the principle very thoroughly in a way that everyone can understand. And Alkali basically tries to answer questions and is the comic relief to what Boozy's doing. And it works very well as like a straight man,
again,
common man
yeah,
setup.
the principle of expert in thing explains thing to person who knows nothing about it style of podcast works for a lot of stuff.
Yep, and it works great for this. This time they were talking about...
Something we cannot say.
Oh, yeah, they were talking about that.
Yeah, they were talking about a particular Pennsylvania law that bans a very specific thing that sometimes happens in bathrooms. I am not going to get any more specific than that.
Because we can't.
Because we ticked the box that says this podcast is appropriate for all ages.
Although it is 69 degrees out right now.
Nice. So, I'm also going to speed us up by 1 mile an hour because I'm currently driving at 68 miles an hour.
That's funny.
Yep.
We're still within the speed limit for the record.
Yeah, the speed limit on this road is 70 for the record. But I am currently driving at 69 miles an hour because comedy. To quote the internet, that's the funny number.
So yeah, we can't talk about that. Look up their episode. I'm sure I don't even need to tell you that they're a way better podcasting thing than we are, and you can learn more about it.
On Apple Podcasts.
And if you don't want to listen to an episode that's about a not safe for work thing, they also have plenty of episodes that are about safe for work things.
I mean, they swear a lot.
They do.
Yeah.
But other than that, there are safe for work things if that's not your taste. Yeah. So that did end a little bit early because I think Boozy did the smart thing, which I appreciate it when panelists do. If they block the longer time slot than they think they'll need. If they know they're going to be like between 1 hour and 1.5 hours, they'll give themselves the 1.5 hour, and then you just get out a little bit early.
Yeah.
Which I appreciated because it meant we could leave and get home by midnight, which we somehow managed to do. I still don't know how we did that.
To do, in spite of the fact that we needed to stop to get A, petrol, and B, food.
Yeah.
Granted, we did both things at the same place because I once again went to that Tasty's Burger.
We're not sponsored by Tasty's,
but the burgers were good. I got more food last night than I did the night before, and I think I overdid it a little bit because I got two. The first night I just got like a side of fries with stuff on. I got the fries with stuff on and 2 additional sides the following night. So I think over the weekend I had a balanced, sensible amount of food. But anyway.
Yeah, I have no idea what you had this weekend. I don't keep track of that because it's your business.
Yep, you do not need to keep track.
So we slept in, got a little bit later today because today is still Sunday somehow.
Yep.
And got it there, I think about 9:30-ish.
Somewhere in that ballpark, yeah. Which again, packed up the Airbnb, did all that jazz, and got on the road. Had to explain to the Airbnb person why I was wearing what I'm wearing, and we should talk about today's costumes. Mm-hmm. You are wearing?
I'm a cow. Moo.
Specifically, you are wearing a very large hoop skirt with, that is a white skirt that we attached a bunch of spots to, and corset. And everybody knows immediately what you are when they see it. Yep.
I do have a cow headpiece, and I was carrying a plush cow. I did try carrying around plushies a lot at this con because it's much appreciated in the furry community.
Yep.
I had a lot of fun doing that.
Yep. Whereas I am Count Cornelius Cheddar. And if you get that reference, I am impressed. I am not going to explain it on this podcast. So, we got in, and we started off the day locked out of the panel room.
Which I don't think was on the con. I just think they didn't realize the door was locked. And then we, being the problem-solving people we are, as opposed to calling con ops, sat down.
Did nothing.
Yeah. We're just like, it'll resolve itself at some point.
It did. Somebody else fixed the problem by going to con ops. But yeah. So the first panel of the day was, what's it officially called?
It's just called Basic Law.
Basic Law.
Which I'll admit, this panel is basically Boozy Badger teaching a class in law to people, where he'll go over a basic legal principle, in this case due process, and maybe apply it to a modern case. We won't talk as much about that part.
Yeah. And just do it in the Socratic style. I.e., he's going to keep asking the audience questions. You're going to say, "Is it this?" And he's going to go, "Yes," but also no.
I mean, I do that all the time.
Yeah.
I'll admit this panel makes me a little jealous just because, as a college professor, I want a room of interested people who will actually raise their hands when I ask them a question. You know what I want for that? I'm like, I understand that a con, it's obviously self-sorted. You're not going to get a bunch of like disinterested students who are being forced to take that class because they don't even know why, and it's at 8 a.m. and they don't want to be there. Like, that's the target audience is a lot more difficult for me than it would be for Boozy, who's going to get a group of con goers who are choosing to attend a panel at 10 a.m. in the morning out of their own free will. Like, that's going to be a way more interesting group than the group I'm teaching.
Yeah, apparently he keeps telling them to give him a smaller room for it because apparently last year they put him on the main stage at 10 a.m. So, yeah. But that's, again, it was a fun, very interesting panel, talking about legal principles and getting depressed. Because, the law is sometimes terrifying and depressing.
We'll let you fill in the gaps on that one.
Yeah.
Because it's not worth talking about in this podcast.
Yep.
I will say that you were an example of what he was talking about.
Yep.
Let's leave it at that.
Yep. And hilariously, we did also meet another British guy there.
Yeah. That was cool.
That was cool.
It's always nice when you can make that connection at cons.
Yeah. So,
People talk to us also afterwards about some stuff, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
It's always nice when people come after you after panels to kind of talk. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah, somebody was asking us about the process of visiting the US if you are British, and I basically said, here's how it worked for me back before I got my green card, and here's how it'll work for my parents who are coming over to visit the States in a couple of months. So.
Well, I also found it interesting because both us and Boozy were at the next panel. I didn't know he was going to be there, but he was. Mm-hmm. And he got there before we did because we were fielding questions and he was not, which was hilarious.
Yeah, that was amusing.
So, yeah.
But yeah, so good panel, kind of depressing because talking about the law sometimes is, but well-presented panel and, worth talking about. Mm-hmm. So next up was Iggy's Guinea Pigs.
Yes.
Which is a game show that Iggy has created himself.
Yes.
It's sort of based on a combination of a few other old game shows, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But it's quite silly. It's quite fun. I would recommend giving it, being a guinea pig if you had the opportunity.
In maybe just that one context.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we were at a furry con. That does have a bunch of different meanings. But no, that was a fun panel.
It's kind of hard to describe because he has so many different like mini games in that one that you can kind of play. But you're basically trying to, what do you call those like things at the end that he was doing? Do you remember what they're called? They have a certain name. They're a certain type of puzzle.
They do, but I can't remember what they're called.
They're basically puzzles where like you see a picture of an eye to know that you're supposed to like say the word eye. You use pictures to kind of, I think it might be called a pictogram or something. I'm not sure if that's right. Basically, you play a bunch of mini games to solve a puzzle. And then at the end, if you know the puzzle, your team wins.
Yeah.
This was another one where we had people who knew what they were like. I didn't even think they really knew what they were doing at that one. It was Sunday at a con.
Yeah.
He just had his friends come up to like volunteer at his panel to make sure he had enough participants. I think more so than anything else at that one.
Yep. But again, another one where it's 2 teams of 2.
Yeah.
Getting 2, people from the audience and 2 people who theoretically know what they're doing. Which again, I actually think is quite a good way to do these kind of con games.
I do too. And we try not to, Iggy asks us to, and we also try to follow this rule. If we participated in one game show panel throughout the weekend, give other people a chance to participate unless no one else wants to.
Yeah. And in this case, we ended up playing against each other in the final round purely because
everyone else in the room had already played, pretty much.
Everybody else who wanted to had already played. And we were like, we'll volunteer for the last round. It'll be fun.
Yeah. So we did that. It was fun. I was not taking it very seriously. I hope no one minded. I did find interesting that by Price is Right rules, my guess of how old is this map, 2000 BC, would have been correct.
Yeah. Because the answer was 2012, and everybody else guessed it was newer than that.
Yep. I love Price is Right rules sometimes.
Yep. Again, there were several people in the audience arguing that you should have got it under Price is Right rules.
It would have been funny.
It would. But the game was not playing under Price is Right rules. It was just nearest.
And I saw, because the picture puzzle Boozy realized at the very end, and he was so excited about it, even though I had the, I think, last guess where I'm just like, so I just kind of gave it to him because I was just like, you should just have that moment. You need it.
Yeah. But yeah, again, that was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And I think at that point, it was a little bit of a break and charity auction, correct?
Charity auction.
Yeah. So this is something that you tend to see at FurCon specifically, is a charity auction. Again, They are there to raise money for a charity. They are partnered up with a charity. They want that charity to go away very, very happy.
Yep.
So they are going to auction off a bunch of, people are going to donate stuff and they're going to auction it off. Some of it is stuff that people at the vendors hall have donated. A couple of the things are things that were provided by the charity. In this case, they had some artwork that was created by a wolf.
Yep. That went for a lot. They went for like $200.
Yeah, that went for a couple of $100.
Because I think the wolf didn't want to create the artwork, stole the piece of paper, like ran and tried to get away with it. They had to like chase him down to get him to get the.
Yep. So there was a story behind that particular piece of artwork, and so we did actually buy a couple of things at this charity event.
Yeah, we spent a bit more money than we intended. I think because both of our attempts to bid on stuff were kind of a bit confused. But it's for charity, so I don't think we minded terribly much. Because when you were bidding for your, I'm going to say cock, because it's a giant chicken. It's called a cock. That's not cursing, because I'm describing the animal that it's about.
Yep. But let's be honest, everybody there knew what they were doing when they were calling it that.
Yep. I mean, you got congratulated on your big cock after you won it, so you know.
Yeah, by multiple people.
Yeah. So yeah, and that one I think somebody thought we were bidding when we actually weren't.
You didn't hear what I said when I went up to the stage to collect it.
What?
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
But yes, so there was a tiny bit of confusion. Because we initially
to verify you weren't like rude to anyone though, right? You were just making a joke.
No, I made a joke.
Okay, that's what we're saying.
The joke got a laugh.
Yeah. Again, we don't mind having to give more money to charity that we can afford to give to charity.
Yeah, like again, I don't think I think there was some confusion over whether we bid the second time, but
who cares?
If we disputed that we did, there wouldn't have been a problem.
No, we just decided to roll with it.
Like, yeah,
we'll roll with it.
I think we're comfortable.
That cock is important enough.
Yeah, it's sufficiently large.
Yes. And then when I bid, me and some other person bid at the same time, and neither of us really wanted to bid more because this was a small T-shirt, and no shade at furry cons, but small T-shirts, specifically women's small T-shirts, fit maybe like a 5% demographic of people who can wear them, which is not a problem, but it does mean that like limited people could appreciate that shirt. And I think all three people in the room who could have fit into it bid on it out of guilt, including me.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So you acquired a new shirt that you'll probably sleep in.
Yep.
You'll probably use it as a pajama top, which is.
But again, it was like $30, and we were both tied at 20, and I just bid more because I just wanted to end the stalemate and made it get less awkward for everyone because no one was sure what to do.
Yep.
And that's fine. It's a funny story, and it's worth $10 extra for a funny story.
Yeah. Exactly. And again, like for the record, we are quite happy with the things we bought.
We are.
We are in no way attempting to quibble. We had fun.
We had a blast, and I'm happy to give that money to charity who needs it. So.
Yeah. And again, I think the charity, we don't know exactly how much money was raised because they will not be announcing it until closing ceremonies. Have closing ceremonies happened yet?
I think closing ceremonies are about to start in 1 minute.
Yeah, because we're about to hit 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
So they will be announcing at that point how much money they raised in total for the charity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to assume it was a fair amount of money, given how much money some of those some of those things went for.
Yeah, I think there was a fursuit, and a fur head, and I think some
tail and gloves.
Plus
a backpack that came with it. There was a care kit that had the stuff you need to look after this suit.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on fursuits. I know that they can vary a lot in terms of their quality from stuff that, if you're trying to buy them cheap or budget, have a lot less bells and whistles. This one seemed to have a lot.
This one was provided by one of the con's guests of honor.
Yeah.
And based on what they said, I think they are well known to be a very good craftsman.
Yeah.
So this was a popular one.
It went for over $2,000. Like almost. I think 24 was the.
It was either 23 or 24.
Somewhere around there.
So yeah, the charity made bank today.
Yes.
It's good for them.
And the auction in general is a lot of fun. Most of the stuff that they have are just stuff that people donate. They kind of take in and auction off.
You know what I'm now thinking about?
What?
The car hood.
Yes. we're not really in the furry community, and we've only been to a couple fur cons so far. I'm sure people know what I'm talking about when we say carhood if they are in the furry community. But basically, I think it's unclear where it started because people were debating its origins, but I think sometime between 2016 and 2023, somebody painted a car hood at a furry con with like furry con stuff. They didn't want it on their car, or they found it. And I'm still not clear what happened with it.
No, I don't think it is.
Yeah, and donated it to the auction, and then somebody bought it. And then the next year, they repainted over the like whatever number was on it that year, returned it, and
donated it
again.
They did not ask for their money back for the record when we say return. We mean they just donated it again.
Yep.
And the exact words of the con this time was, "Here it is again. We're not doing this a third time."
Fourth time. Remember, Boozy made everyone count that it was the third time it's been auctioned off already.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. If it turns up again next year, they're definitely going to auction it off next year.
Yep. Just for anger.
But they did flat state, yeah, we're not shipping this. If you can't get it home yourself, don't buy it.
Yep.
So, yeah. They
also had a giant, like, cardboard cutout of Alkali.
Not what I want to know what I overheard in the corridor after that.
You'll tell me once you're off.
Yeah, the person who bought that has plans.
Yeah, the furry community has a very fun sense of humor generally.
They do. And the comedian Alkali is one of those comedians who knows how to make himself the butt of the joke in a way that everybody else enjoys.
Yeah. And you would know if you were pushing up against a limit of his. I don't think anyone could get close. He's very good at, like, being a really good sport about it generally.
Yeah.
Because he knows it donates money for charity and stuff like that.
And yeah, they raised a lot, which again, fur cons, they generally raise a lot of money for charity, depending on the size of the convention and all that jazz. But like,
so that was the last thing I think for us.
That was the last thing. At which point, well, the last thing was
you had to pick up the cock.
I had to pick up the cock and the t-shirt.
Yep.
Because again, technically, the way they were doing this auction, which I think actually worked pretty well, was when you said, when the auctioneer, and again they kind of rotated auctioneers to give everybody's voice a break, said sold. They asked, "What is your badge number?" Gave them your badge number, and then they basically were just keeping track of that. So you would go up at the end and say, "Here is my badge. Here is what and they would go, "Okay, you owe us this much. You pay. Here are your items." Simple, straightforward, worked pretty well. But yeah.
After that, again, it didn't take too long, and we just kind of hit the road after that.
Yep. Again, quick break to grab some water and that kind of jazz, and then on the road and start recording the podcast. So yeah, that was what we did at this convention. I am very tired right now.
You still punch drunk, Kai?
A little bit.
We still have to talk about what we didn't do.
Yeah. So there was a fair amount of stuff at this convention.
Yeah, honestly, they had more programming than the convention we were at last week that had 20,000 people, even though they had the 10th of the amount of people.
Yep, they actively have more. Congratulations, Motor City FurryCon. You have more programming than Fan Expo Cleveland. Good job.
And I think better run programming, too.
Yep.
Thank you again. I want to emphasize this a lot. As a disabled person, letting me sit down in a room for as long as I want, as long as there's nothing going on and I'm not bothering anyone, is a godsend. Please keep doing that. It's amazing.
Yes, that was the right decision. Thank you. So yeah, so there were a whole bunch of other paneling going on this weekend. We're not going to have time to we could theoretically shout out all of it, but we'd be here a while.
And then we don't really know exactly, because sometimes the programming descriptor isn't actually what the programming is, so it's a little bit difficult for us to review. Yeah. They did have an artist alley upstairs, which we mentioned briefly. We didn't really ever go into that, I think, just because it was always kind of crowded.
It was always kind of crowded, and you were in a ball gown. So, yeah, no, because I don't think it was open on Thursday night, was it?
I do not think so. No, it was not.
Yeah. If it had been open on Thursday night, that's probably when we would have had a quick stick our head in and look around.
And yeah, I do think that is my one kind of critique with spacing, is just the artist alley and dealer's den just were open very limited amounts of times, which I do understand that you want to give the artists and vendors a break. But it's also something where I'm wondering if you could have people rotate off or something like that, just to give us a bit more hours when it's not packed or heaving.
Also, one thing that got pointed out to us at the staffing panel that I do want to shout out, they deliberately had 42 vendors this year. Again, Hitchhikers fans, you completely understand why that was funny.
I will also say that one of the things in the auction, this was more serendipity than anything else.
So one of the things that they do for this con is you could get badges printed with custom artwork. And one of the things they did was print special badges. I'm not sure what the specific purpose behind these badges was, but they printed 100 badges that had a artist's rendition of Deep Thought, the computer from Hitchhiker's Guide, as a cat. Mm-hmm. This was very funny. They deliberately hung on to one of those badges, number 42, so they could sell it at the charity auction.
Guess how much it went for?
It sold for $42. That is the correct amount it should have sold for.
Like, I don't think anyone had the heart to bid more than
Nobody
that.
had the heart to bid more than that. Like, at that point, it was just a case of, yeah,
that's what that should sell for.
Yeah, that is the right choice.
Because you're not supposed to technically bid in any increments that aren't, in this case, $10. But there were a couple moments where I think they made exceptions in that auction just because it made sense. And that was one of the times where you should have made an exception. Yep. And they did, so that was great.
So, yeah.
So other than that, there's a couple things that they always have at fur cons that we don't really do because we're not as big into the, I guess, furrier aspects of the furrier community. Does that make sense as a segue?
Yeah.
So they're pretty much always going to have a fursuit making Q&A, which I assume is very helpful if you want to make a fursuit. We don't, so we didn't go to that.
Yep.
They also have just a couple panels like on fursuiting generally. They have a couple art-based panels where you can either draw or like tell somebody stuff to draw, which we normally do go to. This one was just really late at night, so we didn't go to that one.
Yeah.
But it did look like it was going to be well run and fun, and probably also contain not safe for work art because of how late it was.
Yeah, I'm assuming so.
A couple trivia panels we didn't go to just because they were across stuff. Most cons do late night werewolf these days. Of all cons, I find that's just kind of a con tradition. So werewolf is like a hidden role game that you can kind of play that is very easy to pick up and learn. I find pretty much all cons do like a night version of that game now, not just furry cons.
Yeah, it started cropping up at a lot. But to be fair, if you're playing werewolf at a furry con, there's a non-zero chance people are actually going to be dressed as wolves.
Yeah, it's probably, more immersive experience, honestly.
Yeah.
This is not a game I'm terribly interested in, but I'm sure it's fun.
Yep.
Like I mentioned before, furries pretty much always have dances. So they have one Friday night, one Saturday night, and one Sunday night. That has not happened yet at the time of this recording.
Yep. So for all we know, the Dead Dog Dance went very, very badly. I kid. I'm sure it's going to go great. But, again, neither of us are particularly sort of loud dance music people.
Yeah, furry cons tend to play very, loud, beat-driven music, and that's neither of our musical tastes. We don't tend to go to them. Although if you want to have a furry ball, like a formal ball with some people in fur costumes, I will absolutely be there.
That's actually a really good idea.
Yeah. If you are listening to us, please consider doing that. Like, having a different dance with a little bit different music style, I think would be a lot of fun. Because I would love dancing with furries. Some of the music gives me a bit of a headache. So I can't dance with them in that context. No judgment if you like that type of music, though.
But yeah.
There's a panel all about weather. We had a storm chaser there. Which was pretty fun.
Yeah, even if they did apparently spend most of the weekend getting blamed for the fact that the weather was a bit drizzly. Which, yeah, that's...
Well, they had to cancel the stargazing panel because of that, so... They do have I want to emphasize this, blind furry called Citrine, who's part of their comedy troupe, but also does concert stuff. If you're interested, they are a very good musician, based on what I've heard, so you should definitely look them up. And they're the type of person who can write a song about anything in less than 5 minutes, which is very impressive. We saw them do it at one of the improv panels.
Yep.
And they had a couple panels on specific mediums. So Friends of Bluey is there. They had a Neopets panel. I think I've gone to that Neopets panel before, which is why we didn't go this time, but it was very good and well done last time, and it was a great nostalgia trip. And it meant I got to carry around on my Neopets plush on Friday, and people pointed it out to me, which was great.
Yep.
They had a couple crafting things. Stitch Bitch. Oh, sorry, I'm not supposed to say that word. It's fine. We're late in the podcast. I'm not doing great with the explicit stuff this one, am I?
That one's referring explicitly to a female dog.
Yes, it is.
It's fine.
They were crafting specifically female dogs in that panel.
Yep.
They had a college fur panel for people who were in college. and like wanted to be furries. They had stuff about aviation world building, which we caught the back end of because it was before a panel we wanted to go to.
Yep.
That was great. Just to see people passionate about that.
Yep. And yeah, the other thing I should mention that I did forget earlier that this con has, and something that so far every furry con we've been to has, is something called the Headless Lounge.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, and I just want to bring this to the podcast's attention because the Headless Lounge basically is the place in which, if you are in a full fursuit and you are overheating, you can go to the Headless Lounge, and it's basically full of water and air conditioning.
Yes. It's functionally the same as like a cosplay lounge at like a non-furry con, except it's specifically for fursuiters.
Yes, if you are not either a fursuiter or a fursuiter's handler, you are not allowed in that room.
Well, like for a lot of fursuiters, them not having their fur head, although I'm sure not all, it makes them feel like they're kind of naked.
Mm-hmm.
And they want kind of a private space where they can take off their head without feeling like they're kind of naked, which is 100% valid.
Yeah, it's like walking in on somebody while they're in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Just don't.
So it's great that they have that, and I imagine, again, we don't go into it because neither of us fursuit, but I imagine it has like fans and water and all the stuff you would need.
Yeah, and they sort of screen it off so that you can't, because again, the doors were constantly open. We couldn't see into it at any point because again, you had to sort of like walk behind a screen in order to actually get into the space.
And yeah, somebody who doesn't do like fursuiting generally, I really want to emphasize I never feel excluded at these events because I can't do like a fursuit parade or go into the Headless Lounge because I still get plenty of remarks in the hallway that I love, and fursuiting is such a specific experience, and they've spent so much, like this con really needs to be about them in that way.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that they have that for them.
I would agree.
Plus, I will say cosplay lounges in general don't tend to be at all helpful for normal cosplayers, so I've just kind of given up on using them at all.
Yeah, they kind of suck.
Like, maybe it's a place to sit down, but like, I can't really change because they don't have like dividers or anything in there, which would help me change or stuff like that. They're just chairs of the like it's never really made sense to me as a concept. Headless Lounge does make sense to me as a concept, though. And I'm glad it exists.
Yeah, 100%. So, are there any other particular panels that we want to sort of shout out that we did not attend?
Do you want to talk about the age regression panel?
Did you want to?
It's basically what it sounds like. So age regression is something for which you regress to a previous age in a way that's therapeutic. It's not sexual. It's not intended to be sexual. It's just a time period for which some people it can be healing for them to regress to an age, typically in childhood, that's younger than the age that they are now. I've seen them sometimes at furry cons. I haven't really seen them anywhere else. It is something that I'd be interested in like learning more about, but I'm not sure if I'm really ready to enter a con space with people who are doing it quite yet. So that's the basic behind it. They also have a job searching panel, which is cool for people who have jobs, some photo shoots, some basic stuff, and the general, they have a tabletop and video game, which pretty much all cons have.
Yeah. And again, we did sort of pop our heads into both. Both appeared to be running quite happily.
Yep.
Yep. Not the biggest spaces we've ever seen for either of those things, but they were using the space they had quite well. And again, this convention center only has so much space. I think they were using it pretty well for the most part. Like, I don't have any... There's nothing I can really point to and say, you did that wrong. You know, given the limits you were operating under, I think you did a good job. My only real thing is, I wonder why they did it, is why they moved registration upstairs.
Yeah, I'm still a bit confused about that. So that's... We can segue, if you want to, from that. I think we should do like 3 maybe criticisms of the con, and then our top moments, because that's normally what we end with, unless you have anything else you want to say in this section.
No, I think I'm good kind of talking now about just, again. So, do you want to start with yours?
Okay, so we'll start with criticisms, and again, these are all extremely minor things. I do think one of mine is just the registration line thing, because the whole way upstairs was pretty impassable for parts of the day when you had like ball gowns and fursuits walking down it. The air conditioning breaking was not their fault, I want to emphasize, but it's also something for which maybe there's another place they could have done registration, but I don't know what was behind that decision either.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if I do have any significant...
Like, there's not really anything that big, and I do want to emphasize that.
Yeah, like, again, a little bit more early morning paneling on the Friday, maybe, but, like, I get why they don't.
And some of the stuff I think was in rooms that were the wrong size, but it's hard to anticipate like
Yeah.
what's going to be popular with people there.
Yeah, you just never know with something like that. And again, for the most part, very well run in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like in terms of stuff I can actually complain about, I don't really have much of a list.
I don't really either, but I wanted to put this in like as a segment so we could do it in the future when we did complain about stuff. So find something so we
Okay.
can have this be a segment.
I heard from some people that there was a really big line. If you were one of those sponsor people and you wanted a drink at 6 o'clock, the line got bonkers.
Yeah, again, they were giving away free food and beverages.
Yeah.
But there was, I think, a bit of a space unit issue upstairs, and we just weren't upstairs most of the day, so we didn't experience that.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, I can't think of anything either.
Yeah.
We'll keep that as a segment for future events.
Yeah.
It's fine. Why don't we talk about how bad Fan Expo was really quick?
Yeah, sure. I'm just bemused by the fact we're driving past a place that's apparently selling diesel fuel for 0.009 cents.
That's a typo.
Obviously, but it's funny. So anyway.
Fan Expo was horrible. That's the rest of our criticisms of Anthro, or of Motor City Furry Con. Got it.
Yeah. Not Murder City? Nobody got murdered, we're pretty sure. But yeah. So, should we talk about top moments?
Yes, that's more positive and fun.
So should we kind of go back and forth on this?
Okay. So top moment for me was, I think, just breaking the host down in the Whose Line Is It Anyway panel.
Mm-hmm.
And how it looked from the audience, but
oh no, yeah.
It was a fun moment, and what was even better about the moment is people kept complimenting me on it throughout the weekend, which made me just feel so happy. So thank you if you did that.
I would say probably one of my top moments was, so there was this moment when we were loitering outside main events waiting for the charity auction, when a couple of people just came up to you, but again, these were full-on fursuiters, they wanted to take pictures with you, mm-hmm. And it was really sweet.
It was adorable.
And you got this really cute hug from them, and I was like, oh god, my heart.
Yep. And pictures with fursuiters are great. I'm also going to put in my top 5 talking with the con staff. They were all really friendly and welcoming, and were a lot of fun to talk to. And I love when behind the con scenes you can see that everyone like wants to work together and bring together a good event. That made me really happy.
Yeah, I would agree. What else? So I would also say, stupid uneven road. So yeah, I would also say just the energy of this con was just really, really good generally, and I'm trying to think how I can phrase this as like a specific moment where having somebody come up to you after a panel that you would not in any way running and just like, can I talk to you about this?
Mm-hmm.
And just being able to form those connections, I really appreciate and liked.
Yeah, I think after one of the Whose Line panels, I wound up just talking to somebody before our next panel started because we were just in the same room for like 20 minutes. That was awesome.
Yeah. And again, it's nice to form connections with people.
Yeah. And I hope to see them at other cons.
Yeah. And yeah, as I say, while I was waiting to pick up the stuff we bought at the charity auction, I was talking to somebody who's going to be at a con we're going to in like 3 weeks' time. So we might see them there.
You can say what the con is.
Oh yeah, that's Antro, Ohio.
Yeah.
I was giving them parking advice.
Oh yeah, parking advice will be needed for that. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
So is that 3 each, or do I still need a third?
You still need a third, and I still need a third.
Okay. I'm horrible at counting. This is why, again, you should make people at your bank count out $1 bills. It's really like, it helps with the counting.
Huh. Dear.
I'm trying to think of like specific moments.
Again, we're still in that fuzzy con high. Those are words in English.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I really did like you kind of nerding out at the Will Technically panel, because it's a time period where you're showing the happiness that I show for other things, and watching you do that is just so infectious, and particularly like talking to that person who was sitting next to you.
Yeah, sorry I don't do it more.
it's just nice to see. And again, it's nice to see you do it with other people, which is also awesome.
Well, it's mostly me talking about science fiction bores the bejesus out of you.
It only bores the bejesus out of me like 95% of the time.
Mm-hmm. Whereas again, I get the warm fuzzies when I can like talk, talk nerdy with people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, honestly, getting flirted with by a certain comedian because like sometimes you just need the confidence boost.
Again, I want to emphasize that flirting at furry cons is not, it wasn't done with any intent.
Oh,
we
God,
were
no.
never uncomfortable. And also, and I do want this on record, if anybody wants to sleep with him, you have my full permission. You can do that. I don't care.
don't. There's a non-zero chance they will send this link to him because they think he'll find that funny.
Well, yeah, now it's your problem to deal with. I don't have to. And also, there's no way anyone is listening to. How long have we been recording?
A long time.
Yeah, there's no way anyone's getting this far. Okay, briefly before we finish up, since the criticism segment didn't work because this con was too well run, let's talk about a new segment I also want to bring in briefly before we have our final evaluation called Logistical Things the Con Did Well, which I would put a soundbite in for, except we don't edit this at all in case you can't tell.
D.
Nice job.
You're welcome.
So, what logistical things did this con do well that we really liked?
Room management.
Yes.
That was very, very good. The programming and schedule, having it pre-printed, having it be on theme, all of those things were fantastic.
And it was also on the walls. It was outside of panel rooms. There were directions on where to go within the building.
Oh, I have a complaint.
Okay.
The map was wrong. So on the map,
oh god,
on the map and the printed schedule, panel room 1 and 2 were the other way around to how they actually were, and I don't know specifically whose fault that was. The confusion lasted for about 20 seconds, and then everything was fine.
Yep.
So, don't worry about it. That was not actually that much of an issue. When I'm like, if that's the level of nitpick I have to do in order to find something to talk about, you're doing fine.
Yeah. Again, it's better to have the schedules printed than not that.
Yeah.
Having water stations everywhere, also great logistically.
Oh, yeah.
And letting people into rooms, I know I've said this like 5 times, but letting people into rooms to sit down and like relax between panels or before panels is amazing.
It is.
Please do not stop doing that.
Keep doing that. That is the right decision.
Anything else logistically you want to bring up that was pretty cool?
Nothing major. Again, I think the registration staff did an absolutely phenomenal job, but we've kind of already talked about that.
And registration staff, I don't know, I've not staffed a con, but I truly do believe that registration is one of the hardest jobs at a con. It's a lot of like work doing stuff for not a lot of payout because you're pretty much always solving problems. They were fantastic.
They were. So overall, usual questions. Would we go back to this con next year?
So this is interesting because this is, I do think, and we've talked about this before, it's kind of hard to compare cons across genres. Like this con and a catacon, which we also love, are just so different that it's impossible to like compare them to each other.
Yeah.
What we do like to compare cons to is their kind of genre of con.
Yeah.
And I do think this con is probably the best, and I'm not saying the other 2 furry cons we've been to did a bad job. I'm just saying that this is probably the best iteration of a furry con I could think of. Like if you wanted to go to a furry con, this would be a really good pick for a furry con to go to. Yep. In terms of it, like being logistical and being welcoming. Like I would recommend this con to pretty much anyone who lives in the immediate area or is just curious about furry cons and happens to be available this weekend.
Yeah. Because again, the question of would we come back to this con next year does have one other factor, is this is a 4-hour drive for us.
It's a 4-hour drive for furry cons, and we've talked about this a little bit off mic. For furry cons in particular, just because it's so much of a community con and you really like getting to know people across the course of the weekend, you really do want to be there all 4 days. Yep. It's just more fun.
Yep. So a lot of it comes down to, can you get the time off work?
Yeah.
What's going on with the schedule, all of that stuff. So I'm putting this con in the very strong maybe category. Yeah. And that is not a knock on the con.
No,
that
it's
is
not.
what will my holiday days look like? What, and a bunch of other logistical stuff that has nothing to do with the con itself.
Yes. And this is why I say our like go back, not go back rating is always going to be personalized to like our stuff particularly. Yep. If you like live in Ann Arbor and like are at all interested in anthropomorphic animals, or even if you're not and just kind of curious, you should definitely go.
Yeah. Like this would be a good con to attend.
Yeah. And if you are further away but have this weekend free and want to spend the time and money, you should also definitely go.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know if we will have this weekend free next year. That's the only big question.
Yeah, a lot of it's going to come down to what your spring semester teaching schedule looks like. What my work from home ability is, and all of that kind of jazz. So.
Yeah, thank you for this con, by the way, if anyone from the con staff is still listening to this, because we had a fantastic time.
We did.
We definitely needed this as a palate cleanser after last week's con, which I will continue to throw shade at. Because it's a corporate con, and that's the big difference.
Yeah. Like, again, you outdid a multi-million dollar corporation by a lot.
And as I mentioned last week, we do judge corporate cons more harshly than we judge non-corporate cons, because
they're getting paid.
They're getting paid. They're making money. You're trying to support a charity.
Yeah.
Those are different things. And even with that higher criticism we were giving them, you were still light years better. So, awesome job. And thank you for this con. We needed it.
Yeah, we did.
So, join us next week. We're reviewing Cleveland Pet Expo, which has nothing to do with Cleveland Fan Expo whatsoever, despite having a similar name.
Yeah. And again, that's probably going to be a lower key episode. It's probably not going to last as long as this one did. I don't know how long this episode lasted. I'm concerned it might be close to 3 hours.
It can't be. We're not even in Columbus yet.
We're getting close to Columbus.
Oh, look, that thing.
So yeah, we may have been on the road for over 2.5 hours at this point.
But this is a sign that we loved your con a lot.
Yeah, we had that much to talk about, and we were, let's face it, we were reaching to find criticism.
Yeah.
So, fantastic job. We enjoyed it a lot. Whether we come back next year is going to be more based on our schedule and our availability than anything you guys did. So.
And honestly, I want to see a steampunk furry crossover con.
Oh my god, that would be amazing.
Like, not just the theme is steampunk. I've seen that at, I think, a couple cons before.
Yeah, no, I want those two communities to meet, because they would enjoy each other's weirdness.
Yeah. So, next week we'll be reviewing Cleveland Pet Expo, not Cleveland Fan Expo, not anything related to that. That'll probably be a shorter episode. We might finish that episode up if it's shorter, just because we'll need to have something to do on our drive back, just by talking about general, like, tips for cons generally.
Yeah.
Because we do attend a lot of cons, and we do have tips for how to manage your time at them well, depending on what you want to do.
Yep.
So we will hopefully see you next week, possibly on Saturday, depending on how many times we want to go.
Yep. Yeah. Next weekend's a bit more loosey-goosey. We haven't really figured out the full details yet. So thank you very much for listening.
Remember, his name is The Accent is Real now.
I'm concerned by how long this is going to last. So thank you very much, and hopefully we will see you again.
Yes.